Committee Room 29. Signed. 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 Committee Room 29, Sound. 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 Committee Room 29.
Okay, good afternoon everybody and welcome to today's sitting of the Education Committee. I'll just do housekeeping arrangements as standard. So I'd advise members that the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online, and advise anybody in the public gallery that they're welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and that all devices are muted, and it's not permitted to take photographs or record any of the meeting. So that brings us on to item 1 to start the meeting, and that's apologies. I have an apology from Colin Crawford, who is sadly having to attend a funeral today, and I don't have any other apologies, but should note that Peter Martin is joining us online. Peter, I hope you can hear and see everything okay. If there are any issues with your audio or the feed, do let us know. And I just ask for Peter joining online to use the raise hand function when you want to come in, so I can bring you in the right order. Item 2 is chairperson's business, and I would refer first of all members to item 2.1 there, which is the record of the informal meeting with the departmental officials, and then a subsequent informal meeting with the Royal College of Nursing, which happened just this week. And both those meetings were following on from the Children's Law Centre briefing that the committee received informally, covered issues around restraint and seclusion and the ongoing work to develop statutory guidance on that for the education sector. So that's at page 3 and page 7 of your table papers. I think we have heard now several perspectives on the issues, and I felt the briefing from the Royal College was really helpful, really thorough, I think, and gave us a good understanding of where that organisation's specific issues lie. I would suggest that some of this information will inform our evidence sessions today, potentially with the special schools principals who are joining us. But I would perhaps suggest that anything more broadly than that, if members are in agreement, we have a briefing coming up from NIPSO, which will probably close off some of those sessions of evidence, and we can then agree maybe any definitive actions committee might want to take at that stage if we're agreed. Agreed? Refer members also to correspondence in your tabled papers from Next Steps Transitions, which all members received, I believe. This is a commercial endeavour. They're seeking a meeting with the committee regarding support for young autistic people as they transition from school to the next phase of education, training or employment. I'm open to seeking members' views, but I would suggest that it's quite a detailed written briefing. We may want to share it with the EA if that's something they're interested in accessing in terms of any of the services they want to use. But it is generally the committee's approach that we don't advocate for any particular commercial enterprise over another if members are in agreement. We agreed? Yeah. Okay, so that moves us on to item 3 then, which is declarations of interests. I would want to just register, there's a couple of pieces of correspondence in today from Angel Eyes. I've just note my wife is an employee of that organisation, but other than that I've nothing else to add. Are there any other declarations that need to be made? David?
Just in terms of special schools, my wife being a governor of Mitchell House School.
Okay, no, that's noted. If anything else arises today, members are free to come in with that as is normal practice. Okay, item 4 is matters arising. At page 7 of your packs there is correspondence, a response from the Education Authority to committee correspondence in relation to Cubby, and the correspondence from Cubby, the organisation itself, at page 11. So the committee considered correspondence from Cubby at its last meeting, who were seeking a meeting regarding its sensory hub, and the committee had previously asked the EA for an update on its pilot project in relation to Cubby's, and that was received on the 20th of January 2025, so you have that in your packs. So I'm just really opening up to seek members' views if anyone has any feeling on how we progress with this. We all got the opportunity to see the Cubby in action when we visited Bangor Academy. I think Deputy Chair got to try it out, I think, if I recall correctly. It is in the range of supports that schools can opt to use in terms of the SEN or SPIM provision, and it probably is at this stage for the EA, I think, to make a call again, similar to the previous item, as to whether or not they want to go ahead with any sort of wider procurement. Unless members have any other proposals of how we would progress that, I would be content to note at this stage. Agreed. Okay, that takes us to item 5 then, and that's the draft minutes. So I'd refer members to the draft minutes of the committee meeting of the 9th of April 2025, and that's at page 13, and I would just be seeking agreement that the minutes are a complete and accurate record of proceedings. Is that agreed? Agreed. Okay, just get a copy to sign there. Thank you. Okay, so that's initial business out of the way, and we're on to now the first of our briefings this afternoon. So the witnesses aren't here as yet. Okay, so we can move on. We're a wee bit ahead of time, so I'm assuming neither set of witnesses are here. So we'll just, as usual, to make use of our time, we can make a start on correspondence, and if I could just get notification when the witnesses are available, that would be great. So if I could ask members just to jump ahead in their packs then to item 10, which is correspondence. So I would refer members to pages 148 to 265, plus some additional items that were tabled, where we have a summary note then at page 148 provided by the clerk. So is that witnesses are in? Witnesses are in. So I've built up the excitement about getting to correspondence, but we are going to be able to return back to our briefing. So you can hold off on item 10. So we'll return back to item 6. Apologies for asking members to jump backwards and forwards on their pack. So item 6, it is a briefing from the Special School Strategic Leadership Group, who are just making their way through, and while they're getting seated and settled, I'll just refer members to the briefing note from the committee clerk at page 22. There is a report that has been provided, which was an ETI report on persistent and challenging behaviour in special schools. That's at page 24. And then there is a note provided by the Special School Strategic Leadership Group around essential training for special schools, a report, and that's at page 39. Also in your tabled papers at page 32, there is a briefing from the Children's Law Centre around restraint and seclusion, which it's a note of their informal meeting with the committee, which some of the issues are relevant and crossover, so members may want to refer to that. But at this stage, it's really to introduce our witnesses. So here today, you're very welcome. We have Colin Ward, who is the chairperson of the Special School Strategic Leadership Group, and Ros McFeeters, who is the vice chair. So you're both very, very welcome, and thank you for giving up your time in your busy days to brief committee. We're really, really glad to be able to hear from you. We have been looking at issues around special educational needs in considerable detail for quite some time, but certainly not in this mandate. We haven't had the opportunity to really directly hear the voices of leaders in the special school sector, so it really is, it's going to hopefully be really valuable insight. We do have the EA briefing us afterwards, and there may well be issues that we can directly take forward today in our evidence session with them. So I'm going to hand over to you at this stage for an initial any opening remarks or presentation you want to make. If I could ask that be up to 10 minutes, but no need to hit that as a target. If it comes in less than that helps keep things moving, and then we will move to question and answer. We aim to keep each inquiry with each member to in the region of 5 minutes per inquiry. So if I can just ask members and also witnesses to try and just be mindful of that. We do really want to hear your evidence, but if we can keep it succinct and to the point, so we can make sure everyone has the opportunity to come in, that would be really helpful. But at that stage, hand over to yourselves for any opening comments.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the invite to come to talk to you today. We really do welcome this opportunity and your interest in SEN and the fact that it is such a key issue, it seems, at the moment for obviously for us in schools, but also for the Assembly. So my name is Colin Ward. I'm principal of Parkview Special School in Lisburn. We currently have 223 pupils in school, aged from 3 to 19, with severe learning difficulties. I've been principal of a special school, not just Parkview, but previously another one in Antrim, for 14 years. And currently I'm chair of the Strategic Leadership Group of Special School Principals, which is the group of principals from all across the country. And we meet to represent schools and liaise with different groups.
Okay, I'm Ros McFeeters. I'm principal of Hillcroft Special School in Newtonabbey. I've been principal there for 14 years and 3 years as a primary principal prior to that. Our school, a bit like Colin's, we have 250 pupils with severe and profound and multiple learning disabilities, and continuing to grow significantly.
Okay, and just to add to that then, the SLG group represents the full range of special schools. So Roz and I are both from schools for pupils with severe learning difficulties, but our SLG group represents full range of SEN. So we wanted to talk today about the SEN reform agenda, and I suppose use that as a framework for our presentation and our discussion this afternoon. And we want to start off by saying that we really welcome the ambition and the commitment of the Minister and the Department of Education in this far-reaching agenda. And we were, when we read it, we were really glad that we could hear our voices in that. And we believe that that was a result of many engagements over the past number of years with DE and EA, with our colleagues, principal colleagues, and governors. So we want to say that we greatly look forward to working with the Minister, with the Department, the Education Authority, and other groups, including Department of Health, in its delivery. So I wanted to start off by talking about the current state of play in special schools. And I need to say that the past 6 years have been a very dark and difficult time for us in the special school sector. And over that time, and so I suppose thinking back to the period just before COVID, we have seen a significant increase in numbers, significant changes in pupil profile and their presentation. So there is an increase in comorbidity of diagnosis. So pupils who don't have a diagnosis of just one condition, but more than one, and sometimes multiple conditions at the same time. And complex medical needs, and then behaviours of concern. So yes, an increase in pupil numbers, that numbers are just going through the roof, and that has led to a real sense of overcrowding. So the special school, I mean, all of our schools have had additional classrooms added on, but we're finding corners of the school site. We're finding staff rooms and cupboards and corridors to teach children in, and so those are all short-term measures to get us through a crisis of numbers, but it's not a sustainable approach. And the existing estate is really creaking and crumbling. So the expansion in numbers of pupils has led to a crisis in staffing as well. And it has been a real challenge to find, train, and keep the right people in the right numbers. And that's an ongoing struggle for us. So we have pupils with the most complex and most challenging needs, and we need really good people who are really well trained to work with them, and it can be really difficult to find those people and then keep them. And at the same time, we've seen a significant increase in the bureaucratic demands, taking leaders, principals away from strategically leading organisations, so that a large amount of our time is spent either managing crises or operational issues that we're not trained to deal with, and it's not a good use of our time. And consequently, we don't get time to develop our organisation, develop our schools, and think and work strategically. So we have to say that we feel depleted, and we're managing our schools through crisis after crisis. And we're working in a rigid and process adversarial system. We're really desperate for change and desperate for a new vision for special schools. So here we are at a point with this SEN reform agenda, and we're really We're really encouraged by what we read within it, because we hope that it is this new vision and a new opportunity. So like the Minister, we see this agenda as an investment in education, and we want to use it to see the best outcomes for our pupils, who are the most complex and vulnerable in the country. So when we read it, we see and we appreciate the references made to the expertise and the wealth of knowledge in our special schools. So I've talked about the staffing crisis and how difficult it is to get good people. But I have to say at the same time, we have some brilliant people who work in schools. And what we want to do is to develop them and support them to do really good work and to keep them. So we're committed to extending and enhancing the innovative approaches and the good practice to develop our role in the local communities as resource hubs to support inclusion. And the delivery plan acknowledges that there are specific challenges facing schools which need to be addressed. And we want to move on now to talk about a few of those challenges. So the first one that I want to talk about in a bit more detail is behaviours of concern. And I sent out the ETI report. Perhaps you were wondering why I issued a report that's it's 12 years old now. So this report was written, I remember it being produced at the time, 12 years ago. John Hunter from ETI wrote it. And it hasn't changed. We haven't moved on. John's recommendations have not been delivered. And that's a cause of real concern for us. We're no further on. The only difference is that the numbers have increased and the complex needs of those pupils that John refers to in the report have increased. The challenges have increased. And our capacity to meet those challenges, because of the overcrowding that I've already referred to, our capacity to meet those challenges has actually reduced. It's more difficult. We, from our experience, our training, our knowledge of working with these pupils tells us that pupils with the most challenging behaviour need space, appropriate space, whether it's outdoor space or breakout space, and we have less and less of that space because we're squeezing more and more children in. So the situation has got worse, and we've got less capacity and resources to support those pupils. Sorry, have I maybe talked about accommodation too much?
No. I'll take over if you don't mind. So Colin has mentioned about the behaviours of concern, and I suppose a big issue around that is around the accommodation. We'll not labour the point on the overcrowding that we have in our schools, but if you have a look at the optimal pupil numbers exercise, which was carried out by EA over the last year or so, you'll see that the vast majority of our schools are significantly overcrowded, even with the additional classrooms which have been added on. For a lot of our schools, we were given additional classrooms, but the infrastructure around that, our school halls, our dining areas, all of those things were not increased, but also other rooms have been repurposed, and therefore our specialist rooms, our breakout spaces and outdoor spaces that Colin has referred to have all been eaten up to provide additional classrooms, and as a result of that, then really the spaces have been compromised. The curriculum offer has been depleted to an extent, but our environments then are not conducive to positive learning or to regulation, which is really, really important for our young people. There was a survey that was carried out, a scoping exercise that was carried out within our sector in January 23, and it was around behaviours of concern and what the biggest issues were, and the top indicator for that for us was that accommodation was what was really driving a lot of the behaviour, which is very concerning. We really appreciate that the Minister has heavily invested and has announced in new special schools, but we know those aren't going to happen overnight. And also, I suppose we want to be clear that all of the children in the schools currently need appropriate and beautiful environments which I know the special schools, when they're built, will provide for us. Colin had also mentioned around the staffing crisis. We really have some absolutely amazing people. It takes very individual kind of person to want to work in our environments, but they are exceptionally challenging. And as a result of that, then we really have trouble recruiting and retaining our staff. We need positive professional pathways for them, time to train them and to empower them and to support them in the work that they're doing. And I know that there has been a lot of discussion around the fact that we do not have enough time to be able to actively meet with our staff whenever the children are not there. A lot of people's contracts have them finishing at exactly the same time as the children and so on. So that, along with the amount of training that is required for our staff, and I know that Colin had circulated a list of those, of the amount. I would say that's a very conservative guess on that, but you will notice that skill improvement and teaching and learning really are not even listed on that particularly in any depth, which I know is what you're very concerned around. So we're grateful that the Minister has announced an investment in staff as a priority within the SEN reform agenda, and that also includes all staff, including our very valuable learning support assistants. I'm not going to labour the point today on complex medical needs. I know that you as a committee are very aware of that already. The fact that I'm not going into much detail on it does not mean that it is not exceptionally important, and it is a daily struggle for us in our schools to meet safely the complex medical needs of the children in our schools. That it really cannot be underestimated. However, I know that the PHA are carrying out a review at the moment. We have been actively involved in supporting that and in contributing to it. So we look forward to hearing the outcome of that and then what actions will be agreed and be taken. And I suppose we would just be encouraging you as a committee to be as involved as possible in the outcome of that. We very often say when we're talking about our young people in school, it takes a village to raise a child. And as a result of that, I suppose we feel that the need for multidisciplinary and multi-agency, multi-departmental working is absolutely essential for us to be able to meet the needs of these young people. These additional needs are there when the children are born and are there whenever they die, and it's a cradle to grave provision that's required, and there is definitely a need for joined up working and a requirement for it actually in order to be able to meet the needs of our young people in their schools but in their whole communities and to allow them to thrive and to really meet their best potential. I suppose those are the main issues we wanted to raise today. We can see again within the reform agenda and in the delivery plan that there are an awful lot of actions and commitments there that we feel would definitely address a lot of the issues that we are facing. We are very committed to, as a sector, to being involved in that, and I know there is a place for us within it. However, we need action to be taken now in order to address a number of these issues that our special schools are facing, in order to empower us to be the best we can to support the rest of the education sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you both, and that's all been a really helpful, quite whistle-stop tour through some of the issues. And I know you've referenced the medical aspect of some of the challenges that you face in the nursing provision. I don't plan to sort of labour the point on this at all, but obviously I'm conscious that there's a disparity, that some trust areas have retained nursing provisions and others haven't. And I obviously welcome the PHA review that's ongoing, and it has been a real privilege to be able to work with the Southeastern principals that kind of drove that work to get to that point, which I think has been very positive to see. But I am conscious there's a big disparity on that, and again, you may not want to comment in detail given that there's a review that is active, but one of the messages that tends to come through from the health side is that the areas where there's no nursing provision, it's working absolutely fine, and there's a system of delegation, and that there isn't necessarily a significant issue of concern. Is that reflective? Because I know there is disparity of provision, and I know you can't speak for all your colleagues, but to give us a sense of an overview of the feeling among school leaders on this.
If you don't mind, I'll speak to that. My school is within the Northern Trust, and the Northern Trust schools have never had nurses. So this is not something that we have lost, but we have never had to begin with. And therefore, within our schools, we've had to make provision. Now, and again, I understand that there is a process of delegation and so on going on. I would not agree that our trust area schools would feel that it's all working absolutely perfectly by any means. There is a process of delegation, but there is a lot of work that needs to be looked at in relation to how that is actually rolled out and carried through. DEEA policy all needs to be very much addressed around it, and we have been crying out for a nurse for many, many years. As a school at the moment, in my school, I have 38 different delegated nursing tasks that are going on across my school. And 24 of the 33 classes have young people who require medical interventions on a daily basis. It is not sustainable within the resource that we currently have to be able to meet those needs in the longer term. Only I have wonderful, wonderful staff who give and give and give. But there is a disparity as well, even in the roles that those staff are playing across the schools.
And look, I think all members will be in agreement. You know, having visited special schools, I think that is the one thing that shines through. The commitment of the staff is just it's so apparent in what are really, really challenging circumstances, because you know as particularly that school, the estate that you're operating within is not fit for purpose to deliver the really quality provision that I know you want to. I'll just ask a final question on that, and then I'll move on. In terms of the medical aspect and the lack of, or the need for nursing provision, do you feel currently that the level of risk you carry is sustainable in terms of managing the medical needs safely and effectively?
Without a nurse, so in Purview we do have a nurse. We're very fortunate. I feel that because of the complex nature of the needs of pupils, that it would not be sustainable. Children's presentation does not always follow the care plan that we have. If they did, it would be easier. And as well as that, we have multiple children in a class with medical needs, and where our staff teams are trying to manage and be aware of everyone's issues and needs, and it's extremely difficult to do that with a nurse on site. Without a nurse, it would be.
I can't see that it will be sustainable in the long term, particularly as the children coming in are becoming more and more complex every single year.
Look, that's really helpful, and look, I think it's just important to sometimes get some of that stuff on the record. There is a review that is live, and we hope that the recommendations arising from that are deliver some positive change. Let's hope. So that you referenced the ETI report, and absolutely the dates on that are pretty stark. 2012-13 report. From your experience, has, in terms of any of those recommendations around what would be needed to help in terms of managing, how you describe it as those behaviours of concern around keeping the children and young people safe and staff safe, have any actions recommended in that report, as far as you can tell, been meaningfully progressed by the department? No. Have you had any engagement from EA or department around what support you need, or what that might look like? And I mean meaningful, focused engagement, not a visit or. Yeah.
So the SLG group have been meeting with people seconded to the Education Authority who are putting together a proposal for a framework, a behaviour framework that would help us to start addressing this. And these are really complex, challenging issues. We know that, like, if the solution was easy, we would have had it years ago. So we're not expecting an overnight answer or solution. I think what we want is recognition and an opportunity to plan and design some options that might help. There's no guaranteed success in this, but I think what we're looking for is an opportunity to engage with the right people, knowing that the right resources will be made available.
Could I just to pick up on that then, one of the recommendations in that ETI report, and I know a lot of special school principals and also parents of some of the young people who would be in that sort of cohort of young people who are presenting some of the challenging behaviour, would say that they think that there is a need to think really seriously about a different type of provision that is not necessarily the model that we have in our special schools at the moment, but perhaps a really bespoke education, health wraparound provision, maybe for a long period of time, maybe for when it is needed, and to move in maybe a regional facility, whatever it might be. I know that ETI report recommended a steering group should be established effectively to develop that. Would you be in agreement that that is needed? And do you have any sense that there is meaningful work taking place to take that forward?
So yes, we would agree that there is a need for that, and I think when I have referred to the collaborative working, this is not something that can be addressed with just education. Health needs to be involved and at the table, because an awful lot of the time what we are seeing is young people where education is not at that stage their primary need. They have healthcare needs that are very serious and need to be addressed in order to have those young people ready to learn again. So I think we definitely would agree that there needs to be some kind of a wraparound provision. Now, whether that is in pockets across a number of the schools, regionally or locally, I think a steering group absolutely needs to be set up for us to look at what is good practice, what is working in other jurisdictions. Again, a number of our colleagues have been over to see what that looks like in other places. There are examples of very good practice, so we wouldn't need to start from scratch necessarily, but certainly what we currently have in our education system is not meeting the needs of a number of those young people.
Well, look, I'll leave it there. I think when we're in a scenario where we're hearing from parents, we're hearing from school leaders, from teachers, classroom assistants, that the children and young people's needs are not being met, and that staff don't feel equipped to meet their needs, and that staff at times don't feel safe or at risk of injury. With all of that in the mix, the idea that we should try and tinker with the system we have, to me, doesn't seem to make sense. And I think we really do need to start that serious work of thinking about that. So we can certainly pick that up with the EA and department from here. But look, at this stage, I'll hand over to the Deputy Chair.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thanks for your presentations. Would you be surprised to hear that this committee has found very little evidence of concrete collaboration between the Education Department and the Health Department? Would you be surprised to know that the Education Department and the EA don't know where the gaps are in the system in terms of provision of allied health professionals such as speech and language therapists, behavioural therapists and so on? So, if you have X number of children with speech and language difficulties, you then need Y number of therapists to deal with that. Would you be surprised to learn that neither the Education Department, the EA or the Health Department aren't aware of, one, how many allied health professionals are in the education system, and two, where the gaps are?
I suppose what we would see is that there aren't enough AHPs to meet the needs of children in our schools, and part of that is the rapid increase over recent years in numbers and children in units attached to mainstream schools. So therapy provision is spread very thinly, and we don't have enough people to meet the needs.
Well, that's consistent with the evidence that we're hearing in the committee from a range of stakeholders. But I suppose your starting point must be to do an audit of what's required. And that it would appear that first base is, let's do the audit. Let's see how many and what range of allied health professionals we need to support our children with learning difficulties. And we haven't even reached first base yet.
respond to that?
Sure.
I think one of the concerns as well that we would have is that because obviously we are now one education authority, there's still the 5 health trusts, and the provision is based around those trusts generally. So I think what we have found is that the way that those therapists are allocated within each trust area is a bit different. And how the provision is made through both schools work and community work seems to be different across each area. I believe that the PHA were doing some work on trying to gather some of that information to look at creating business cases, but I'm not sure whether that's happened or not.
Thanks for that. Maybe we can investigate that further at some stage. That's all I have. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Michelle, you were next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both for your evidence today. I think we all appreciate the pressure that you're under in special schools, and I think you've conveyed that really vividly for us today. One thing, you said a lot of things that I could ask about, but I'm going to start with, you mentioned as school leaders yourselves and as principals that you don't have time to think and work strategically. Would there be any specific solutions around that you think would help you overcome that?
Yeah, okay. So in Parkview, Parkview isn't the biggest special school, but we have 120 members of staff, teachers and classroom assistants, cleaning staff, caretakers, so just the everyday management of that number of people it's like a full-time job, but it falls to me and my very very able office staff as well. We spend a huge amount of time performing very operational duties, like sorting out leave and absences, and it's not a good use of my time as principal of, so I'm the highest paid person in the school, and yet I'm end up doing very basic managerial duties. So I think one thing that we would like, and I speak for a lot of the principals, is some support with that, or the opportunity to bring in a member of staff who would support us in that role and carry out those duties for us. That would free up a lot of my time to do more strategic things, more in terms of developing school, developing training, supporting colleagues.
And you would need resource for that. I'd say you wouldn't have a budget that would stretch to an additional person of that nature right now.
Yeah, we would need resource for that.
Is it worth mentioning about how our staffing resourcing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I suppose what I would maybe add to that, and you're saying about not having the resourcing for that, so all the special schools have partially delegated budgets for staffing, and therefore we have no flexibility on which members of the roles that we feel we would need within our school. We have no ability to then go ahead and recruit those people. And so very often what one school would need, another one would need something different, but there isn't that flexibility. We don't have that control over our staffing budget or our staffing cohort to really be able to have the autonomy to meet the needs of the school, which would in turn support us in the work that we're doing. At the end of the day, all of the school principals were trained as teachers. And we are the lead learners within our schools, and that's the role that we are meant to be providing, the lead trainers, the lead strategic direction finders and problem solvers in relation to the needs of our young people. And we're just not getting the opportunity to do that because of the kind of bureaucratic load of leading big organisations with large numbers of staff. Which I think is part of the challenge.
And if I could just jump back in there, the other thing that takes up a huge amount of time is managing the crises that arises from very challenging behaviour and very complex medical needs. So we're juggling between managing staff and all of those issues, and then managing crises.
Yeah, Thank you. You also mentioned that you would like the special schools to be hubs within the community. I think you kind of touched a wee bit on the allied health professional aspect, perhaps, if that would intersect. Can you just say a bit more about what that model would look like and how that would be beneficial to the schools themselves but the wider community?
Yes, I mean, I'm sure we can both talk about that. When we read about the hub and the plan, we started to dream about a school that was well resourced with a wider range of well-trained, well-experienced staff teams that had capacity not just to meet, not just to teach a class of children, but to reach out beyond that, to support children in other schools, children at home, families at home, and to deliver more of a wraparound care rather than just the conventional 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock. So to do that, we would want more AHPs on site who were part of a team that we could collaborate, true collaboration with. Would love a youth worker who could develop that sort of evening provision and summer provision. A social worker, more collaboration with health, whether that's behaviour therapists or psychiatry.
Time's very short, just to finish up, so very briefly, and then we'll have to move on to the next member.
I think we appreciate that there is an acknowledgement within the review that the special schools have a lot of capacity. We have a lot of expertise that we know would be good to share. We have an awful lot of great working going on within our schools. We feel depleted at the moment. I'm not going to pretend that's not the case, but I think if we were able to be resourced appropriately, we would be able to be a really good resource for DE and EE within our local communities, to be able to be actually helping to meet the SEN needs and the training needs and the support needs for the families in the local area.
Danny, you're next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for coming in. I suppose I just want to go back to the SEN delivery plan, and you're right to welcome it, because there's a lot of stuff in there that if it was implemented in the morning, it would make lives a lot better. I suppose I just want to hear your concerns, because I would be concerned about the lack of targets that is in this, and I suppose maybe funding will come into it, but it's the accountability side of it to make sure that we're heading in the right direction, because we can go back 2 decades and find reports saying the exact same thing that needs to be done. So I would just like to hear your concerns around this new SEN plan. Or would you even share what my concerns would be?
Certainly, yes. I suppose we're still waiting we've seen the delivery plan, we're waiting to hear what the outcomes of that will be, how that's going to be monitored and evaluated, and what that will look like. So I suppose we are maybe not at a stage yet of knowing about that, are we?
No, I don't think we are. There are parts of it that are probably resource, maybe not neutral, but less costly to implement it, in terms of ways of working. But a lot of it is based on a large capital investment, and without that, it would be hard to deliver on some of the key elements of it. So we look forward to that, as do many others.
Yeah, and I suppose it's what can be delivered. I suppose if we were to think in the short term, that's what I don't feel there's anything in it that will make tangible changes unless there's this big massive investment in it, and I suppose that's a big concern I have, that we're not going to progress, because I suppose the next stage of it for me would be the displacement of children is a massive concern. That ones that should be in special schools are not, and they're in the SPIMS. Are you feeling that, or hearing it, or under that pressure from parents, I suppose, wanting to get their children into your schools?
We are oversubscribed, certainly, and the SPIMS have been set up obviously at pace as well. In relation to the appropriate placement, I think there are a number of things that could be done around that initially, but that it would require restructuring, I think, of a lot of the processes, and I think probably EA will maybe be able to tell you a wee bit more about that whenever they're coming in.
I suppose the reason why I'm asking is that usually the ones in the cold face of it, you just have to deal with decisions that they make on an operation basis, and I suppose that's what I want to get to. Is there things that they're changing right now that are actually making it worse for yourselves, where I've heard concerns from the Children Law Centre in particular that they're just going to move the process and the blockage just earlier in the pipeline. But I just trying to get that feeling. Are you feeling that on the cold face of it?
I suppose what we see is just increasing numbers of consultation requests for places essentially coming our way. But we have we obviously have a finite number of places that we can offer. So the difference that I notice over the years is that there are more and more requests for places.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's only, and I think the trajectory that we got last time maybe is 10,000 more children or 6,000 in the next 10 years. I think that was in one of the reports.
Recall the exact figure.
Yeah, that would be a big concern, and then it's just that placement. But yes, thanks very much. Thank you.
Peter, you had indicated next.
I will unmute myself. Apologies for not being there. Folks, I have a sick 9-year-old on a couch nearby, so I'm sorry I'm not there in person. Look, first of all, can I just thank you for the amazing work that you and your colleagues do in our special schools. It's absolutely incredible, and you do it with some amazing people. So I just want to say that right at the start. I just had one question, and it was actually following on more or less from what Danny was talking about, and it's really around capital. We're aware that demand is increasing for special school places, and also many of your schools are filled to bursting, and I've seen a lot of them, and you have repurposed lots of areas, and you've been amazing in trying to meet demand. I mean, it's really a question around capital and the confidence that you would have and the level of investment that's required to meet demands for special school places over, say, the next 5 years. And I probably put that in the context of we have the first, the minister's ring-fenced send capital for the first time. So it's sitting there. I mean, are you worried, or do you feel confident about whether we'll have enough capital, enough new special schools in the next 5 years to cope with the demand?
I suppose in my experience, and I haven't been involved in building or designing special schools, but my experience, building a new school from scratch takes a very long time, and I would be delighted if there was a new school open within 5 years. I've no idea how we deliver those places that are needed at the pace that is required. I'm glad that's not a decision I have to make. We need delivery of those places and the resources around. So it's not just classrooms; it's everything else as well, really quickly. And I'm not sure how that can be delivered. So I suppose, do I have confidence that it's delivered in 5 years? I think that sounds ambitious.
Okay, Chair, that was my only question. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Kathy as indicated next.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks very much for your presentation. I know that the Chair had covered it earlier, and you had mentioned around the on-site nurses, but it would be really remiss if I didn't ring it up and speak to you today about it, as Knock Even is in my constituency, who have split site over three sites, and are one of those schools who have had theirs removed. And I've spoke time and again with the principal there, and I was going to say I understand how difficult it is. I don't think I could even begin to understand how difficult it is for that school in particular, especially with what has happened there too. What I wanted to ask you was, like, the review that's going on at the minute with the PHA, that is welcome. However, we do have schools who, like yourselves, don't have anything or have had stripped away. And in the meantime, the risk that's there, I looked at the training that, is on offer from the EA, and like half a day on safe feeding training. Surely you can't come out of that confident on safe feeding. But is there anything more that in the very short term immediate action that could be done. You know, we are the education committee. Obviously, there's a huge, mostly health part to play. But what could be done in the very short term by the EA to try and support schools? Because we have the EA coming in afterwards, and we'd just be keen to know.
Certainly, from my perspective, I think that we really welcome there being a transparent process to looking at the needs of these young people and the decisions that are made in relation to whether there is nursing care required or not. And we're not saying that every single special school necessarily needs to have a nurse, but I think looking really carefully at the cohort of the young people within the different schools and what's needed there. Certainly, I think whilst that is ongoing, if there was additional staffing resource within the learning support assistants to be able to support, to share the load around the learning tasks that are going on, because obviously the staff in our schools are there as learning support assistants. In addition to that role that they play and play very successfully, but is also a very complex role in getting to know our young people, they are then required to be carrying out a lot of these tasks as well, which has taken them away from that other role, which is putting more pressure on the teacher to be able to fulfil the learning targets with the young people. So I think an understanding of, and what Colin had mentioned as well, around the fact that within a classroom you may have 3 children who all require medication at 2 o'clock, and they all require 2 people to administer and to sign off on that. I would love for there to be a really clear understanding of what it looks like on a daily basis in the classroom, because I do understand that you know, whenever health are looking at a child, they look at the individual child, and that's their remit. Of course it is, but for us we have to look at a whole class or a whole department, a whole school, and how meeting those needs are met within that sort of more group setting. So I think it would be great if there was the possibility of sort of additional staffing, but I understand that that's not always the right answer, but if it was a short-term measure, it would definitely be helpful.
And like that whole perspective and looking at it, the wider picture, do you think that's going to happen within the review that's happening now? Because it is the PHA that are doing that review. Do you think that's something that will come out of that? I know it's hard to prejudge that.
I don't know, because I'm not sure how much engagement they're having with DE and EA around that. We are waiting for an updated medication in schools policy from DE that has been kind of ongoing for a while. So I'm not sure if that will meet the needs of this kind of level of very complex need. But that should be our guide.
I suppose just the one other thing I would add to that is that I would like EA to advocate on our behalf in relation to the need for nursing within special schools.
You feel that's happened to date?
I think there have been some conversations where they have, but I suppose I would hope that they would be leading the charge on that.
Okay, thanks for that. Thank you.
Certainly something we can pick up in the next briefing. That's very helpful. David, you're next then.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks for your presentation so far. I don't have many questions because I think, as been alluded to, a lot of what you've been saying today chimes with what we have been hearing and some of the discussions. Both the committee and probably many of us will have had engagement with their own local special schools in that regard as well. And I think that is some of the messages here are familiar at this stage. Pick up on one thing from a slightly different angle, perhaps, and something that's happened in mainstream schools and is slightly concerning to me as well, is that understanding that the overcrowding, the need to find space, and that sometimes means making use of spaces that would otherwise be used for other things. I'm becoming slightly concerned at the ongoing trend of and hearing of and seeing staff spaces being turned into classroom space or for other activities. I think it seems to me, as a layman, as an outsider, in that regard, even more concerning at special schools, because teachers are operating in what is in a very intense environment, often with challenges that are not as prevalent in mainstream and often crises that you've alluded to. And it seems to me they, more than most, will require spaces that they can retire to sometimes to have a moment to collect themselves and to recharge and go back to the rest of their afternoon or the rest of their day. How I guess, what is the current context of that across your schools? Is that in most schools, or have those spaces been lost? Are they reduced? What is that looking like? And I just think it's something to flag up generally, because I think it really. I was in a mainstream high school recently, which has had a relatively recent, not very recent, but is a newer school, and they spoke very highly of the very good staff room that they had, and how they felt that helped staff morale and helped what the school is doing. And I just feel that the opposite seems true in some of the schools that are really carrying the heaviest burden. So maybe just if you could speak to that.
We do have quite a number of our special schools have lost their staff rooms to be turned into classrooms, yes. I know some of us, I certainly fought for us to retain ours, and I know certainly all of the special schools take staff health and wellbeing really seriously, and I think we probably lead the way on that to an extent because of the challenges in which people work. But so a lot of us have tried to create even little quiet spaces for people to go to reflect or to have some time to just chat things through with someone. Very often they're a cupboard that's been repurposed, for example. But
I can see how we do. But does that affect maybe the idea of the school and the team building, and sort of the idea of you working together in that regard, if there isn't that time and space for staff to even be necessarily mingling with each other, talking to each other about what each other's facing in that regard? And
that can be an issue. The other thing as well is that very often, because our schools have expanded so much, and what I had mentioned about the infrastructure, then there may be a staff room, so for example a room much smaller than this for 120 staff, so then people are having to dot around different parts of the building, so that meeting together isn't as possible as it used to be. So they're not getting the opportunity that we would like them to have at times.
No, I thank you for that insight. I think we all understand that for a number of reasons, not least because there was that unexpected wave and growth in numbers, because we didn't have those numbers from health and all of that we're in an imperfect space and running to try and catch up now, and that's just the reality of it. So things are not going to be perfect. But I think perhaps we need to rethink. It's okay. Of course, the children are the priority, but the unforeseen and unintended consequences of some of the actions that were taken because we are in an imperfect situation. But thanks for your insight into that. Thank you. Chair.
David, and then last indication from Cara.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for being here. That was such a detailed briefing, so most of my questions have been answered. But one thing that struck me was on page 36, there's a quote regarding I'll read it out. It says, "Physical injuries in our schools are very serious and compounded when we have little or no information regarding new pupils, for example those coming from Europe, as we get little input for mental health." I'm just curious, if you have children in special school settings who are newcomers, for example, is there ever difficulty in getting data from their previous country and how best to support them? Is that something that you've come up against?
No, I suspect, because when I read that again last night, and it sort of took me back to, maybe there was a much greater influx of people from European countries at that time. And I suppose we have a very diverse pupil population in schools for all sorts of reasons, and it's great, and we welcome that. The transfer of information from their previous country, home country, it's not a huge issue at the moment.
That's good. Depends on which country it can be, and the way in which the person has arrived in the country, I think has an impact.
Fleeing war or something, of course, would probably have its own complexities.
Yes.
Can I ask then as well, I just saw in our papers there's a desire for a more effective hands-on approach from educational psychologists. Can you just give us a bit more detail, maybe in your own opinion, what you'd like to see with that?
I suppose what that makes me think is that for these children referred to in this report, we are unable to meet their needs sufficiently with our own resources. We need additional resource, and at times it has been very difficult to get that additional resource, including educational, additional expertise that we don't currently have in school, such as psychology. So I suppose it was probably a desire for more educational psychologists. Now we are working with psychology, but it's probably quite regional. In our southeastern part, we have good links with psychology, and that has been good. We would love more of it, and I know the psychologists would love to be able to do that more. So ultimately it's still down to resourcing.
Brilliant. It's actually been really helpful just to see the breakdown of hours as well around training and how many hours are needed as well. That's something I think as a committee maybe we wouldn't realise how many are actually necessary, so that's very helpful. But no, thank you so much for being here, and the work that you do in special schools is really exceptional. And in my own constituency, we have Rossmar Special Schools, Sandalford, and the staff are just incredible, so we really recognise the hard work that you do, and today has been really, really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, so yeah, that is the end of the evidence session, and there's a huge amount there potentially to follow up with. So as I said, we do have the EA coming in next, and we will. There may be some additional correspondence that we can also follow up on. I suspect once the PHA review is complete, we may want to engage again and to hear your views on that, and I would hope that would be something that we could potentially facilitate. But I think really on behalf of all members, it would definitely be appropriate to finish with a thank you for the work that you do in the special schools across Northern Ireland. So thank you, and appreciate your time today.
You too.
Thank you very much for your interest.
So while the witnesses are just making their way out, I'm conscious there was a lot there potentially that we may want to follow up on directly, but also that some of that may well be directly with the EA. So if members are content, we can maybe at the end of the next evidence session pick up whatever is outstanding, if you're content with that. So that probably allows us to move on to item 7 then, which is the next item on our agenda. So feel free to bring the witnesses through. So item 7, it's a briefing from the Education Authority, again in relation to SEN. It is specifically really following on from the department's evidence that we had at our committee meeting on site at Bangor Academy. It was to really begin looking at the operational aspects of some of the SEN transformation work. I'll let witnesses get seated and settled. This is obviously a huge area, and I think we certainly found whenever the department presented initially on the SEN transformation agenda that it was almost difficult to know where to begin because there was so much. So today may well just be an opener, and we may want in future to look in a bit more detail at some specific areas. So I'll just refer members to page 41 of their packs. There's a briefing note from the committee clerk. We have the briefing paper provided by the Education Authority at page 43, and then we have the SEN reform agenda and delivery plan for reference at page 54. So those are the materials relevant to the briefing at this stage. So thank you all for attending this afternoon. You're very welcome. I'll just do quick introductions. As always, if I get job titles wrong, feel free to correct me whenever you're delivering your session. So we have Dale Hanna, Director of Children and Young People Services from the Education Authority. We have Claire McKenna, Head of Statutory Assessment and Review Service at the Education Authority. We have Elaine Craig, Interim Assistant Director, SEN Statutory Support Services, and Gillian Cuthbert, Head of Service of Post-Primary Behavioural Support Provisions at the Education Authority. Some of those may have changed, so if we've got any of that wrong, I was conscious that as I was reading some of those, they didn't feel right. So I'll let you correct any of those when you come in. At this stage, I'll hand over for initial presentation, up to 10 minutes. We will then move to question and answer. Tend to try and keep that 5 minutes per member where possible, so if you could just bear that in mind. Also always conscious when we have a biggish panel, there's no need for every member of the panel to answer every question. If we can just make sure we can get to the answer, so all members have the opportunity to come in. So really at this stage I'll hand over to yourselves on that, and you can correct all my mistakes and then make starts.
Okay, Chair, thank you for that opportunity. I didn't expect to have that opportunity so soon in the session. So look, obviously I think actually that demonstrates how fast moving the SEN world is actually, even within the Education Authority. So look, Claire's actually now become the interim assistant director for special schools, so there's been some movement internally around that. Look, pardon? Gillian too. Oh, Gillian too, sorry, to get your title wrong as well. Yes. Sorry, apologies.
Okay.
Look, I'm not intending to speak to go through at a high level. You've got the paper, but I appreciate, and you said it yourself, Chair, it's such a broad area, but at a really high level I thought I'll come at this with an operational lens and kind of just set out where we're going over the next 3 months, what it looks like over the next, I suppose, 6 to 9 months, and some of the key areas of concern for me, and then we can get into the questions. Some of this stuff we'll have engaged on before as well. So I suppose looking forward in terms from an operational perspective in the short term, our absolute primary focus is on the placements and capacity for September 25. So that's, critically one of the key parts of what we're doing. And then the other thing is the introduction of the local impact teams, which is one of those, major strategic changes and SEN transformation pieces of work that we've been involved in. And then in the medium and longer term, there's the SEN reform plan, and I'll just touch briefly on that, where I think we are in that, in the areas that I think we might be heading towards prioritising. And then maybe just a wee bit at the end, just to talk about, some of my own reflections in the role as director about where the areas that I think we maybe need to, where could we reach out and get more support from you as a committee, but also, where do you see that we need to do something more around that? And I think that's particularly in the area of confidence and how we can build confidence and trust. So look, in terms of placements, this is hugely challenging, and it has been for the last number of years. I think that this year is very, very different. We have less options this year, and we also have new constraints. So, for example, we've got construction constraints. So we know that the water infrastructure issues are impacting across all of Northern Ireland, but that is also having a huge impact on us in terms of delivering solutions. At the start of the year, when we were looking ahead about what we were planning on, our high-level assumption was basically we thought we needed about 1,340 additional school places for SEN children over what we had last year. With existing capacity and the ongoing work to provide additionality, we currently think that pressure is sitting at about 400, give or take a little bit. And that's predominantly, there's 2 blocks there. There's about 250 pressure in special school places, and there's about 75 in post-primary year 8 places. Both of the significant parts of the pressure are in the Greater Belfast area. So of the 250 pupils or the pressure within the within the special school sector, about 60% of that is within the Greater Belfast area, and for the 75 post-primary, about 67 of those are in the Greater Belfast area. In terms of actual numbers, I suppose I have to caveat that with the point that we know that very soon we will have the outworkings of the general admissions process. So some of those pupils will get placed as part of the general admissions process. So in terms of having an absolute exact number, we won't know that until post those. But look, that's the figure we're working on. Those are our working assumptions at the minute. The second, in terms of the local impact teams, we are on track to begin implementing those in September. I've said this before at committee, this is basically the foundations, and I know, Chair, I've used the plug and play and the platform. That is really putting the infrastructure in place and the foundations in place, and we are on track to achieve that starting in September. In terms of the medium and longer term, obviously we've got the SEN reform plan, and we are currently actively engaging with the department on the operational plan, and in particular our timelines around that. I suppose for me, to give you a sense of what I think we need to prioritise, what are the 5 or 6 key areas, I think it's definitely in and around the professional model of support, which would also include addressing employment and deployment issues for classroom assistants. That's closely linked to our statutory assessment service as well. And areas within there that I think we might get into when we start to look at that are issues around quantification and specification, and that's where within the statement, that's where it's identified what actually does the child need. Other areas of improvement we would want to look at is how do we digitise the service to become better, or how can we use AI to make that service more effective and more efficient. And obviously there will also be the area of SENDIST. There's a huge number of SENDIST appeals and tribunals every year, and that is something that we will want to get into in more detail. Other areas that we will want to look at is early teacher CPD. Obviously there's the issue of initial teacher training as well, and that will have to be picked up. And I think as well we really need to work on greater collaboration and support with our special schools. How can we support them more with some of the challenges that they face at the minute? And we know that they've got issues in terms of dealing with on a regular basis challenging and complex behaviours with children. But also as well, how do we build them into the system in terms of using them and their expertise as well? And then I think somewhere around that as well, we also need to look at SANCOs and the role of SANCOs and how we can support them better, because they will be integral in terms of moving the STEM transformation piece forward. Some of the above, I think, will involve pilots, and we're likely to see some of this being developed in year. But from an EA perspective, what we need to balance and agree with DE is business as usual in terms of how we deliver our own business. And then I guess, Chair, just I suppose the final thing, and it's really, and maybe we'll get a chance to speak about it, I suppose for me, is how do we build confidence and trust in EA and what we deliver. I'm very mindful there's been lots of queries, and you will as independently come to us and raise questions and concerns about the changes that are being developed, and I really want to find a way to provide that assurance and confidence to the committee. But also I think there's a challenge back to you as a committee to support us as an education authority, because we are the key body to deliver this change. The people around this table and the teams that we have, they are the practitioners. So all of the expertise lies within the education authority, or the vast majority of the expertise lies within the education authority. And then I suppose just to conclude, I have to acknowledge the hard work of all of the teams in the education authority. So that's a very whistle-stop tour through that, Chair, and happy to take questions.
That's great. Thank you, Dale. I suppose I want to pick up on the special school stuff, just because we've had the strategic leadership group in before, and they raised a whole range of issues. One of the things it's probably that, and I wouldn't want to labour the point on this, but one of the phrases, and I noted it that they used, was that they feel that they operate in a rigid, process-driven and adversarial system. That was how they described it. Now, I think that's probably how parents may feel in the system at times, and I know that there's been a lot of emphasis on within the EA around changing some of the adversarial aspect of that. In terms of just your engagement with the special schools and some of those, and a lot of this I know comes from pressures around placement, and it's managing resource. Would you say that you would be confident of seeing a change in that sort of that relational engagement with special schools? I felt the real message we heard was they want the EA to advocate for them, was what we heard. That was almost how they finished. We need you to advocate for us, advocate for nursing staff, advocate for safe working conditions for our staff, advocate for investment in the estate. Can you speak to that at all, briefly? And then there's maybe a couple of other things I just wanted to raise.
I think we would agree with that, Chair. Internally, we have reorganised ourselves. So Claire, as interim director, our interim assistant director for special schools, is under the umbrella of CYPS now. Not because they're not schools, they are schools, and we still need to support them from the curriculum perspective, but I think it's also about acknowledging that they do have very unique issues that need to be addressed. So look, I would agree with you on that. I also absolutely agree that we need to get into more of a collaborative space and work more closely with them, and certainly that would be my intention moving forward now that they're part of, I suppose, under my portfolio, that we develop that. Absolutely.
That's to be welcomed. One of the things that was discussed was the ETI report 2012-13. I think it was the time period it covered around. I think the phrase used in the report was challenging behaviours. I think Colin used the phrase behaviours of concern was maybe the language he preferred to use. And when we asked about what actions have been taken on the back of some of those recommendations to really how special schools can be supported to meet the needs of those young people presenting those behaviours, to keep staff safe, they really felt that there was no progress had been made, and that's 12, 13 years ago. So can you give us a sense, because one of the things that they asked about was a need, and I've heard this from school leaders, from parents as well, that for a particular cohort of young people in particular who may present challenging behaviours, may present a danger to themselves and to staff working in the schools, whose needs are not in many cases being met, and staff then who feel they're working often in unsafe environments. The message that we hear is there is a need for something more bespoke, a different model of education, that is a really genuinely sort of wraparound approach with health and education. It may not take place in our special school buildings, it may take place in a different setting. Is there any work ongoing to deliver that? That was a clear recommendation that work should be done in that report. And it was concerning that none has been in 12 years, but where we are now, is that something that the EA is proactively taking forward?
Yes, and I'll let Elaine speak to the detail in a little bit. Look, we acknowledge, Chair, that work probably, some of the work hasn't been taken forward, but I think very recently we acknowledge and know that the schools are under significant pressure. Elaine and colleagues have developed like a crisis management protocol that we have internally, which is about prioritising and supporting special schools where there are particular scenarios around particular pupils. And then more broadly, we're thinking about developing a model whereby we can have a resource or a place where, I think it was Stepaside. I'll let Elaine speak to that. So we do have some thinking on that.
Yeah, well, I suppose obviously none of us can speak for 2012, unfortunately, but what has happened since is we do have, first of all, the Better Together programme, which is jointly health and education, and it's in 3 of our health trust areas to date. The other thing that has been ongoing has been the review of behaviour in special schools, and it's actually a seconded special school principal who is taking the lead on that and is working on an I Thrive model, which is in another jurisdiction, but welcomed here and would be very much, akin to what health would see as needed. And yes, more recently we've set up the protocol for special schools because we were hearing from them, look, it's difficult to get who the right person is. We need a collective response from the EA. We've still a ways to go, and you're right, Chair, I do think that there's warrant for if I had my way, there would be at least one facility in every health trust area for some of our children with the most complex of behaviour needs.
Can I ask in terms of taking, so although some of that work is really positive, and I absolutely would want to acknowledge that, in terms of that sort of aspiration, is there anything that can be done in terms of taking forward business cases to actually progress this with Department of Health, Department of Education, because we need both at the table in terms of actually developing the provision that, from what I hear from the stakeholders in this space, there seems to be fairly unanimous agreement that is needed.
Yeah, there's definitely a will there, absolutely. I think we've a responsibility in the here and now, though, to support our special schools. So if that means that we set up and then health come in after us, that's absolutely fine. I can live with that. I know Claire is involved in the nursing review, and one of the, I can't remember the name of the group, Claire, apologies.
It hasn't started for me yet. So
So Claire's going to be our lead on that, and I would say that will be a key way of taking that forward as well and bringing health along with us.
I suppose, Chair, we have an appetite and have an ambition to support schools, and you're absolutely right, we need to engage and work with health. Nonetheless, I think we want to work at a pace, and so we will do that, and I think we have an aspiration to certainly, at least in some of the areas, maybe try and set up some pilot facilities at some point this year, and that will obviously involve engagement and business case with the Department of Education. So we are keen to demonstrate to our special school cohort that we are there to support them, particularly on this particular issue.
Okay. Well, we'll maybe pick that as something. Maybe there's always a sort of fine line between where it sits with the department as well and yourselves. So I think there's definitely things to pick up there. I just want to ask on LITS, and then I'll pass on to other members, or the local impact teams. And I think the last time you were here, there were concerns raised about it isn't about adding more staff. It's about restructuring how you deliver the service, and I absolutely acknowledge that may well be required. But are you confident that these local impact teams will be adequately resourced to actually deliver the change that is needed? Because you reference confidence. Confidence is definitely low. and I would have a concern if a new structure is launched and it doesn't deliver the change that schools need when they need to access those services, and that parents need when their child needs that service, that it then, if that creates a further decline in confidence, we have an issue. So do you have the resource you need to deliver these teams effectively?
I mean, I think the simple answer to that is probably no, Chair. So we've been the local impact teams have been set up on the basis of the existing resource at that point in time, and obviously the profile of young people has changed, and we would definitely need more resource into the intervention teams to be 100% effective. We are intending to implement the teams, and then I think we have to do an analysis of what we think that gap is, and then we will have to have conversations with the department around how do we fill that gap, how do we identify that additional resource. And again, I think within the confines of the SEN reform and the transformation piece, there may be an opportunity to get that additional resource, but you're absolutely right. We feel we do need additional resource. I don't know if you want to speak to that, Gillian.
Yeah, it's just to say the resource that we currently have in the operational model that we have, we don't have enough staff. If we look at it, we're seeing across the services 8,000 referrals per year, and that's expected to be at least a third of what the unmet need is out within our schools. So there definitely is a need for additional resource, but what we have to do first of all is make sure that the resource we do have is being used effectively and efficiently as possible. So there is duplication, there are challenges there, and we need to change that. Also, to allow us to do that, it is important that we do that restructure of the team around the child, team around the school approach, because that has also been a challenge with the 3 locality areas of the Education Authority. You know, schools have been at a loss as to, well, who do I get support from, how do I get support? So it is about us aligning the best resource that we have at this minute and to be able to meet that need, but there definitely is a resource need for that, particularly as well within the early years is probably the greatest. As you know, the Fair Start pointed out that early years CNES needed 3.4 million and we received 380,000. So there is a great need within the early years, especially if we want that early intervention at the start to be able to make sure that we're supporting both statutory and non-statutory.
And Gillian, can I just pick up on those figures just to go back? You said that 8,000 referrals per year come through to pupil support services currently, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, and you anticipate that that's about 1/3 of actually the identified need. Where's that?
So there was an educational psychology study that was done in 2022 to look at, well, what is the unidentified need? Because we didn't have the figures of the unmet need because, as you say, psychology were the gatekeeper. So again, Sankos were meeting with the educational psychology, identifying who needs to go forward and who's not, etc. So what they expected there, whenever we looked at, the need for this model, was very much then looking at probably 1/3. But again,
that's 24,000 then? Potentially that and already the service is struggling to meet the need of 8,000.
But then it's not just, again, that's not just for early intervention. So that's, again, this is part of the journey that we are on, because our services have been set up to be behind a barrier, suppose at stage 2, which means we're getting children at a stage that's advanced in their needs. So therefore you are then limited to what you can do. So it very much is about how do we actually think about this from a step back, a continuum. So looking through the eyes of the graduated response framework, every child's entitled to an effective education, to high quality teaching and education. And then how then are we making sure that we are shifting from that reactive point to very much earlier intervention and support, and breaking down that wall so that we're walking alongside our Senkos and our schools before the need to get to stage 2 and at that point. And that's the culture shift and the shift that we want to make with the
absolutely.
teams.
So I mean, in terms of if I'm understanding you right, that you want to get to a point that if these local impact teams are functioning appropriately, the interventions go in way earlier, and hopefully then the demand up, as you move up through the school age cohorts is not as high because the support's already going in. But we're in a scenario where we have a backlog almost of years of unmet need. So in this initial stage of rolling out the change, there is likely to be a really, really big rise in demand coming the EA's way. So are you proactively seeking the resource you need to be equipped to receive that? I mean, for me, it seems undoubted that it's going to land.
Okay, so we opened the request for involvement portal in January, which is again the official removal of the educational psychology sort of gatekeeper. And at the moment, the referrals that are coming through are about equal to what we would normally be receiving. So we haven't seen that initial demand. But again, it's about us keeping under review with that, and again trying to put in position the teams to be able to, yes, at the start it will be very much operating as we are, but also we will have the systems and data collection to be able to look at waiting lists, look at supports, and to be able to actively, input into that. But the reality is that yes, there is definitely a need for resource, but we need to be in a position to know what type of resource, what type of person, in the sense of a certain category specialist that we need within those areas to be able to meet the demand.
Chair, can I add? I think the other thing is it's about, we can't look at stage 2 in isolation from stage 3 as well. So the piece in terms of where children are getting resource now, and we know there's 300 million roughly pounds spent supporting children at stage 3, and hopefully through SEND reform, so there is resource in the system. What we want to do is try and find a way that resource can move into schools, directly into schools. So I suppose there is a question as well, an unanswered question that we haven't got to the bottom of. There may be resource that is there. It's about finding a way to get that resource earlier into the whole, to support schools, to be able to, and support the intervention teams to support that earlier intervention. So sometimes these things aren't just black and white, it's those stage 2 services. Actually, it's also the services and the response we provide at stage 3. And if we were doing things in a really proactive way, a significant number of those young people wouldn't need to get to stage 3 because they'd have the right services and interventions earlier on. So is there a way to shift that? So that's what we're trying to figure out.
No, absolutely. Look, there's probably moves us on to the graduated response framework itself, but I think if I start on that, it'll not have time for anyone else to come in. So I'll just finish with just on resource one last question. In terms of your engagement with the department, do you have any sense around if, in terms of the whole SEND transformation agenda and the budget that's been allocated for that, is there money in the system there if you need it? Because again, I just have this concern around, and you highlighted confidence so clearly, and I think it was absolutely right to, that if we, we've made us a lot of fanfare around the transformation agenda, and if we don't resource it and expectations are raised, I think that could be really damaging. So do you have a sense? Is there money anywhere there should you need it or not?
Obviously the department have had been successful in securing money through the transformation bid. We're currently working with them to identify what we feel we need to take forward the pieces of work through the SEND transformation. So there is money there. Whether it's enough money, well, that's a different question. But we are in engagement with the department at the moment around that SEND reform plan, what that's going to look like, what it's going to take us to operationalise as well. And I think the key bit for me is we're still trying to deliver services to children and young people whilst we continue to lead on the transformation and the change. So we are going to need additional resource just to keep ourselves standing still in terms of that, as well as trying to affect the change.
That sort of analogy is of building a new car while you're driving the one that's about to fall apart. Yeah, that's I do understand the challenges there. No, I'll finish with that. Deputy Chair, are you looking to come in at this stage?
Yeah, okay, I'll come in. No, thanks. So, just in terms of the local impact teams, could you explain to the committee who the personnel are that make up those local impact teams? And what their actual role is. What's the local impact team supposed to do at a practical level?
Okay, yeah. So the local impact teams, in a sense of their name as well, I know there's been some challenges with the name in the sense of they should be integrated. So just to clear some of that up in the sense of what integrated.
They were originally a multidisciplinary team.
Well, that is there as well. Will be there. That is the growth piece as well. But the impact is about that integrated. First of all, multi-specialist professionals actively collaborating together. So the LIT was already within the system. So I couldn't change the LIT, so we tried to be imaginative in the sense of what is the actual role of this team. So exactly as you said, it is about team around the child, team around the school approach. And within each of the teams, I can tell you now, there's going to be 20 school age LITs, and there's going to be 8 early years LITs. Each of those teams are made up of representative staff from across the different SEN categories. So in each team, obviously there will be a manager of that team who will again come from a specialist background, and then there'll be representatives from autism, cognition and learning, speech and language within the teams there, and that will include also literacy professionals within that as well. And each of those teams then will come together, and again we will have representatives then liaising with schools who have direct lit contacts. So as a member of the team will have, for say, responsibility or access, key contact role to say 5 or 6 schools. So it's trying to create that approach where if a school needs help, they know who to contact first of all. So if there's an aspect of support that they need, because sometimes it's reactive, some situation has happened or there's a need for a particular child, then therefore they will have that direct contact. And then each school will then have a contact with the Educational Psychology Service and ourselves and the SENCO to start planning what the needs are within the schools. Because across the different health trust areas, the needs are very different in some areas. So we need to get that understanding of what the needs are in relation to professional development, in relation to the presentation of SEN. So that is that piece I was talking about, that it's not just waiting until a referral is needed, that we're walking alongside, and that's that growth piece over the next coming years, that schools don't always feel that they need to have a referral before they see somebody from the Education Authority, and that's the way schools feel at the minute, that the only time they get help is when they have to put in a referral. So that's part of that journey and part of that real foundational working. Then we have the request for involvement, that if a school does need, feels that a child, they've tried everything from the graduated response in the sense of stage 1, that the child needs more, then we have one referral form now. So before it would have been, there was 10 services, so there was 10 different ways to access support. So a SENCO with a child with complexity of need, may have to complete multiple reports, and there may need then to be multiple people attending a meeting.
Okay, sorry for interrupting you, Gillian, but if a school has a number of children with speech and language difficulties and need support from a speech and language therapist, what do they actually do?
So we do not have speech and language therapists within the Education Authority.
Let's say behavioural therapists.
So we'll have say we've got speech and language communication staff. So, for example, if there is a child that has got a language and communication need, normally within the early years of and lower primary, then our staff will go in, will help assess the needs of the child and work alongside them, providing a programme of support for the individual child. And again, that can be done on a tiered basis. For some children, it could be advice and guidance for the teacher. On others, it could then extend to one-to-one direct support. And then there's also the aspect of the community health side of things. So some children will be seen within the community health for speech and language. And then it is working with those members of staff as well if there's support needed.
Yeah, and I asked a few months ago about numbers of allied health professionals that were working in the education system and what gaps there were. No one from either the department or the EA was able to give an answer to that question. Neither was the professional body for the allied health professionals. Have we any update on that? Do we know how many allied health professionals there are in the system, in the education system, and where the gaps are? Because we've been talking for a long time now about the exponential increase in the number of children presenting with special needs. And so if there are X number of children with behavioural difficulties or speech and language issues, then we're going to need Y number of behavioural therapists or speech and language therapists. And I mean, that's first base. We don't seem to be at first base, do we?
I think, yes, there are speech and language therapists and behaviour therapists in the health trust.
I know there are, but nobody can give us a number.
But it's not just them that can support children. So within the Education Authority, we have specialist staff who've trained in language, communication, and speech, through the eyes of education, and will offer support to children within education through our side. But I can't answer
if we know the number of children who require support from a speech and language therapist, then we'll know how many therapists we actually need. Would you not agree with that?
I think Chair, Deputy Chair, that question for us, and I was here when you raised that question before, and we've gone back and reflected on that. I think for us, we would have primarily been collecting information on the children in terms of their SEN category, as opposed to a primary health needs. So we have gone away to have a think about how would we manage or collate that data moving forward from an EA, but it is primarily for health to collate and aggregate that data. As for example, as we spoke, Elaine and I were speaking earlier, if it takes, for example, children that are looked after, we rely on the Health and Social Services Trust to give us that information about the children there. So look, there is work to be taken forward in terms of aggregating and establishing that data, but I think the primary responsibility for that rests with health, and we will continue to explore with them how we can pull that information together in order to answer your question.
I don't disagree with you that health certainly has a responsibility in this area, but I would be more inclined to think that there's a need for greater collaboration between health and education in terms of the overall issue of special educational needs. And I said to the previous witnesses that were here, this committee has received no evidence that there's any concrete collaboration taking place between education and health. Can you contradict me on that?
Well, I'm not going to contradict you, but what I'm going to say is, look, and again, I know I've said previously, at an operational level, Gillian and her teams engage, and previously in your previous role, you and your teams engaged with health trusts on a regular basis. But I would also make the point, Deputy Chair, and back to the Chair's point, EA in itself has a huge amount of work to do to transform its own services and to deliver its own services, and our primary focus is on the work that we need to do for our services to support schools, including special schools, not to discount what you're saying. Do you want to go into a bit of detail around that?
So just to give you one example, is our speech and language. Our speech and language classes. So within our areas, we have speech and language classes, and they are again SLT, speech and language therapist from the trust is within each of those areas, and we're working to align at the minute across a cross-review group with health and ourselves to make sure we've got aligned with our programmes of offer, etc. But we have a speech and language therapist from the trust within those speech and language classes and working to align that across the whole of Northern Ireland.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. So possibly some confusion caused by me. I've been taking indications at different stages across this briefing as people have caught my eye and probably lost track of our system. So I'm just going to, in fairness, open up to members now at this stage so everybody can come in. So please come in and indicate. I've got Danny, Michelle and Kathy for starters, and then anyone else who wants to come in. Danny, if you want to go ahead.
Thank you, Chair.
There's hands up there.
Peter, Peter in, yeah.
Thank you. I suppose one of the last times that the Chief Executive was in, he sort of hinted that they needed to move the EA needed to move away from being bogged down on placements. So I'm just wondering where we're at on what has been done since then around making sure the children are adequately placed in the right setting and also at the same time as their peers.
At the same time as their peers. Well, look, obviously, and we probably alluded to the last time, look, there is a separate process for children that are going through stage 3, and that is a legislative process, and we must comply with that. So there are aspects of that we must address. I think the bigger question is how do we build capacity into the system so that there's sufficient capacity that all the children, both in general admissions and for children that have a special education need, can be placed in a timely manner. That's the piece of work that we're really focused on, but we do have constraints in terms of how we deliver that. Now, we have plans in terms of bringing in additional capacity into the system, i.e. through additional special schools, additional capacity in different areas. So that's what we're focused on, is creating the additional capacity. And if there is the additional capacity in the system, then I believe that what we will find is a situation where those young people will be placed on a timely basis. But there is a difference. Children with a statement are going through that process. They do enter that at different times in the year. So it's not always going to be possible to 100% guarantee that they're going to be placed in exactly the same timeline as their peers.
If we had a send first approach though to placements, that wouldn't be the case then?
And look, I'm aware that potentially that is something that we will have to explore. We will definitely have to pick that up for next year, Danny, absolutely, because as this year has progressed, it has become increasingly difficult to establish sufficient capacity in the system and we are going to have to look at doing something slightly different to be able to do that. And I think that's definitely an option.
As the Minister has hinted around, now my definition of a SEND first approach and his may be different because he's talking around the capital side of it, so that is something that maybe for following year you explore that possibility of a proper SEND first approach.
I think yes, look, we absolutely have to explore. We'll have to take stock of where we are this year, what was successful, what wasn't successful, but this year is different. It definitely is. It has been more challenging to get schools to be able to take on specialist provisions, so we are going to have to look at different ways to ensure that we can provide capacity for those children and young people that need those places.
And in regard to then being placed in appropriate setting, we know hundreds were not placed in appropriate settings last year. Are they getting the right support, and are we facing that same scenario where of the 400 you mentioned that there's more potential for hundreds of children again this year being placed in the wrong settings?
So I suppose I wouldn't agree with you that they were placed in the wrong settings. I would say
last
that they
year,
were placed...
Sorry, I should have corrected. I'm going to actually, that wasn't my words, that was the Minister when he was in February, and I could quote him. He said some children who would be placed in the special school are not, and therefore they are not in the right place. Children have been given placements, but a couple of hundred, I am not sure the exact figure, have been placed in schools that are not the most appropriate. So that's the Minister saying that.
Okay, well look, what I would say is from our perspective, we have worked hard to put in place the right placements, the right specialist provisions across the system in order to ensure that children and young people have been placed in the right provision. There has been an inspection by ETI on those specialist provisions, and broadly that has been a positive. The outworkings in that have been positive. So look, we will continue to work hard. There is obviously the piece that we need to give back provision space to special schools as well, because obviously we have used up all of the available space within special schools. So definitely we need to have a focus on ensuring that we can put in place enough space for special schools moving forward.
And see, as far as the graduated response framework, is that based on elements taken from the draft revised code of practice?
You want to pick that up?
So yes, so the previous code of practice would have had reasonable and purposeful measures. So what needs to be put in place before a child would need, would go to stage 2 of the code of practice, stage 3, etc. So it is a reworking of that and actually an improvement of that. So the content is very much the same as to what we would expect to be putting in place, but it's just been updated to current context and current new literature and new advice and guidance.
Same approach, but making the bones as such. Sorry.
Has there been any concerns raised around this?
No, so the first phase of the foundational training went out to all schools from January to then just finish there at the end of March. And the feedback that I have from the training is an overall positive, that schools can see, are appreciative of that and see it as a document that will grow and develop as new interventions and new, again, out of the SEND reform agenda, new actions come forward.
Okay. So I'm guessing then SENCOs are being trained on this now?
So it's the first introduction, and then they have 2 additional days then within school to look at any sort of potential changes or any updates. And we've also got a business case going in for further training for SENCOs in relation to targets, in relation to outcomes, and in relation to completing PLPs and IEPs.
Oh, no, so that's the last one. So there's been no concerns raised then from
no
outside
concerns,
bodies?
no.
Okay, thank you.
I think before I bring Michelle in, I've had some feedback from SENCOs who were maybe not quite so positive in the response. And I think because I'd had a meeting with some local SENCOs and I had fed back what I'd heard from the EA, that their feedback was really, really positive. And they raised an eyebrow and said that wasn't certainly their impression. And some of the concerns seem to be that there's maybe a worry about some gatekeeping that might be associated with the graduated response framework, and maybe is it a concern, and it may be unfounded, but a concern about keeping children off the SEND register for as long as possible is some of the suggestions that have been raised with me from SENCOs.
I'm happy to take them and listen to those and definitely make a response to those, but that is not the purpose. It's about making sure that it's clear as to how we can work together, and that's what I'm saying. If we wait until the stage 2, then that's not effective. It's how do we support schools at that stage 1 right the way across, so that then whenever a child does need that support, that they are supported to do that.
Well, as possibly individual members can feedback some of those local concerns directly that they're hearing. And just really, really quickly, I don't want to take other members' time up, but just to pick up from Danny's point, one of the things that has been raised is that the graduated response framework feels quite like the revised code of practice that has never been given statutory effect. Is there some concern that a new framework's coming in without the legislative scrutiny that would have been associated with the revised code of practice? Is that something that's been raised with you at all in terms of that concern?
In terms of training, I suppose it's always in anticipation of statutory effect.
Yeah.
So that's what we're working towards, that statutory effect of the new code of practice.
But does that cause concern, issues potentially, like, you know, if when we get to sort of sendist scenario, if you're operating off something that hasn't been given statutory effect, and you're, you know, the legal test will be what does actually sit in legislation? Or are we creating grey areas and some potential areas where there could be challenges there? Would it not be better to, if that revised code of practice is still fit for purpose, to get that delivered and on the statute book? I mean, I'm not sure it is. I think maybe it's so old now. Is it the right thing?
Well, it was 2016.
Exactly.
So I mean,
it's so.
I don't think we can apply the word new to it. But
I suppose if the assumption then was it needed to be given statutory effect, is that not still the case, that whatever we're working to will need to be?
We absolutely believe that's the direction of travel. That will at the point have to have statutory effect. Hence why we're doing what we're doing to align ourselves with that. Whether it creates an issue in terms of sendist, don't know, Chair. We would have to.
I know certainly the Children's Law Centre had highlighted that you know you can only test something legally based on what's the law, not a framework. But that's maybe one for another time. Michelle, you were next.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your evidence so far. I think my anxiety levels though have been increasing gradually as we've been getting through this. I hope things aren't unravelling somewhat. As the Chair said, there's been a lot of fanfare around this. I think everybody is excited to have seen the plan there, and we're really hopeful that things will change. But just the sheer pressures that exist in the system, I think we should be really realistic with people about how much change is going to happen immediately. And I think that's something I'm taking away from the things that you've said so far, be it from placements, be it from the lit teams, that coming into the next academic year, etc., there's a lot of pressure there, and there's going to be a lot of families who are feeling a lot of pain and distress around this, and we should just be clear about that. When I look at the briefing that you sent over, somebody put that down in front of somebody who doesn't know the system and haven't heard these experiences the way we have. You would think we have a brilliant functioning system, that everybody's getting everything that they need. That's not the system that we have, and it's not going to be like that anytime soon. So I felt like from what we've heard so far that I feel I needed to say that. One thing that you've referenced is, well, we know we have a plan. You're working on an operational plan. One thing we still don't have is the outcomes framework. Now, I know I've raised this with the department as well, but they were clear that you guys are collaborating on that and working closely together. So can you give us an update on where that is at, how you've been engaging with that process, and when we can expect to see something?
Yeah, actually, there's a session
today. Yeah, I know.
Ongoing at the moment.
But look, I'm glad. I suppose can I say I'm really glad you've made the point about being honest around the transformation piece. That's actually the point we want to make. And we believe we continually make that, but when we leave the likes of these sessions, then what we find is there appears to be this other expectation that we've resolved this and solved it within a matter of months, and actually it's not going to be resolved within a matter of months.
I don't think we've created that expectation.
No, I didn't say that, but there is that expectation, or there is that perception out there. This is going to be a hard slog. Doing the local impact teams has taken us 3 years. Changing practice for staff is difficult. There's been challenges around some of the thinking around we would move away from how we would deliver intervention services, i.e. on a one-to-one basis, moving perhaps to one-to-one, to small group settings.
Time now, so
sorry, but you look, sorry.
No, he has the clock going here. So outcomes framework.
Yes, session today.
There's a session today, but it is one of those fundamentals as to, in order to make the plan work, everything working towards what are the outcomes we're trying to achieve.
Do we have any sense of what way you're approaching that, or when we're going to get a framework? I think we're told spring. I think we're hitting May here. So when is it far advanced? Is it?
Well, I need to get an update on where we were at today.
We were preparing for this, so we couldn't get to the session.
Is that the start of the process today then? Is that what
It was a
you're saying?
wider audience, so it was health. There was lots of other, you know, outside agencies around
I got
communities.
the impression it was much further on than that from the stuff from the department, that they were going to give us a separate briefing. So I had the
I do
impression
get the
that was much
impression
further
that they
on than
do
you're
hope
suggesting
to
today.
I
bring
mean,
it
there had
along
been
soon-
significant
sooner.
work
Yeah.
done on that, and there had been engagement prior to the publication of the plan with ourselves around that, and we had worked through some of those elements. So I think it's probably towards the end stage of that, Michelle.
Okay, that's good. Okay, well, we wait for it anxiously. The transformation process that you have, it looks at current demand. So I know I've got a lot of constituents now who are still waiting on assessments around like ADHD, dyslexia, other kind of additional needs. So I guess the concern is, when can those kids expect to get access support within the school system, and how does this new system help them avail of support earlier, or will it?
Look, at really high level, our ambition is that we're not gatekeeping in terms of having a diagnosis. It's about you know, as a child presents with need, then we will try and step in and provide that support. Gillian can kind of give you the detail around that thinking.
Yeah, so it's more about thinking of where the child is at. So first of all, the support in schools with the identification of need. So yes, there's always early intervention, but it's about support and identification first of all. So again, we're developing toolkits, etc., in various different areas to support schools with that. But when it comes to the referrals for now, so at the moment we have opened the portal, we have received over 1,600 referrals, and of those 71% have gone through to support, and of which 14% haven't. So again, it's about that work with those schools as to, well, why have they not, what is the need, what else can be done. But we're also changing our mindset to front loading the system. So instead of a referral, we're opening up solution focused clinics, we're opening up more advice and guidance helplines so that schools can just access support when they need it. Because sometimes it's not always within child, it can also be environmental and wider. So it's being able to offer that advice and support then, so that when a child does come through, that we can offer that support. And then on each side then, when a child does come through, it's looking at what are those programmes of offer, what are the level of supports that we could put in place, and for those children then who really need that one-to-one, that we're prioritising those children with that support.
I'm just going to circle back quickly just to ask again about it is
briefly,
a really quick one, so I promise. On placements, and we know there's still pressure there. How confident are you though that those 400 children circa are going to get a place by September?
How confident am I? I probably have less confidence this year than I had last year. I remember coming to the committee and I felt that, you know, we were confident that there would be a smaller number, a small dozen. As it presently stands, we are exploring options, and if we can fulfil those options, then I think we would definitely be in the space that we would be able to place most of those children. But as it currently stands, I can't really accurately predict that, but I do think it's definitely challenging.
For those kids who will be left without a place, so they can still get some support or access the curriculum in some way?
Again, last year our contingency plans were very much predicated on the basis of being able to place a child at a school, even if, for example, we needed accommodation and the accommodation was going to be 2 or 3 months later, and because then they were placed in a school, which is legally required, so a child has to be legally required to place in a school. So we will have to explore what potentially might be contingencies in that scenario. So I can't be definitive on that, but we're exploring that at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
An honest answer, but a concerning one. I think any parents listening to that, it will be of concern. Peter, I'm going to bring you in next. Your hands down. I'm assuming you still want to come in.
I do. My hand was up, and then somebody started to wave at it on the screen, so I thought I should put my hand down. It's Zoom these days. Listen, guys, thanks very much for your evidence this afternoon. I don't think the committee underestimates the complexity of the stuff that you're doing, the work you're doing, but also the importance of it, and it's really, really mission critical. And I'm sorry about the dog that you may hear in the background. My first question, it's all around LITs. Am I right in saying that the LITs are meant to be operational by September of this year?
Yes, that's correct.
And are we still on time scale? Sorry. Might help a smidgen. And we're on time. We're on track for that.
Yes, we're on track. It is a bit tight at the minute, but I'm confident that we will have the foundations. And as I said, it is about those foundations in place for September. There's still a significant amount of growth within that and development that we need to do, but I am confident. I'm still sleeping at night.
Peter, can I just say, I suppose what I would add to use an analogy, I think we'll have passed our driving test and we'll have gone from L plates to R plates. So there's a bit for me about we will have the structures in place, but it is going to take us, a significant amount of time then to build those teams, to build the confidence in those teams, and to build kind of like the rhythm of how they operate on a regular basis.
Okay. Get you in what's 1 wee second, if that's okay. In terms of lit resourcing, then one of one of my colleagues there just asked a question around that. I mean, is it the case that you could do with more in terms of being able to resource these, because they sound really mission critical? I listened really carefully to Gillian. I think this concept of one point of referral and getting the support in earlier is probably the key thing. How confident are you that the resource will be there to support these teams?
Until we explore that with the department, and again, these things require business cases. Peter, I can't sit here and say that we're entirely confident that we're going to get all of the resource that we feel we need to stand those teams up in the way that we want to, but we will continue to fight hard and make the case that they need to be resourced in the right way to be successful. And I think your terminology is right. It is mission critical. They are absolutely going to be front and centre in terms of the success of delivering services to children and young people at an earlier stage. So look, we'll continue to battle hard, and I hope that you and others here will battle hard on our behalf as well. Absolutely.
Final question from me. I don't often sort of cite sort of specific examples, but this is quite an interesting one. So I have a constituent who was absolutely glowing about EA and the experience that she had with her son in terms of the literacy support that she got, and described it to me as transformational. So there's something really, really positive for this afternoon. This particular child got the 12 weeks standard literacy support, and obviously then it was stopped. And it's just a sort of technical question. She was told that the child would need 2 IEPs before that could start again. And I wasn't sure if that was a sort of a school process or an EA process, if that makes any sense.
Okay, I'm going to let Gillian answer that.
Yes, so obviously, Peter, whenever we're trying to move from business as usual, from one operational structure to another, there's obviously challenges within that. When we started in September, I did close the referrals for literacy because we had 1,400 children who were on a waiting list, and they had been selected for that from the discrepancy model. So the aim is that we try to get that list down to 0, which we are just finishing now, so that when we open up the new portal, that will be able to happen and be able to put those children in for September. So what we are saying to schools, we had to put in some sort of contingency, put that in place for now. But in the new model, a request can come back in again for those children, and the future model is, yes, 12 weeks, but 12 weeks with a review, because we had certain situations where support was ongoing for years and years without the outcomes that we want. So it's about 12 weeks with a review. Does another 12 weeks does another 12-week block needed? And if so, then that teaching then continues, and the assessment is done on the outcome of the intervention at that time.
Okay, no, that's absolutely super. My 9-year-old is passing me notes literally now to tell me I have to come to the door. So I think I'll just stop there. And Chair, if you pass on to someone else, that'd be great.
No, Peter, you have us, and we've all been there. You're transporting us back to lockdown 2020.
The BBC News interview and the child and the dog coming in through the door.
To be honest, I'm really glad I blurred my screen, because as I said, I have a 9-year-old who's walking around here.
We can see him.
So it's a really good thing that the screen was blurred. That's all I'm saying.
They get well soon, Peter. All right, thank you. Okay, so I just wanted to pick up really briefly on the literacy, because I think that's a concern probably all members have had shared, that there was a 12-week block that would just come to a cliff edge. So there's an assurance there that if the assessed need remains and that the progress hasn't been made that's needed, that can continue.
Yeah, but we have to be also realistic with that time frame, so that the number of referrals that we get through, so of that 1,300, you know, there's over 800 of those are for cognition and learning. So there's a real need out there that we need to again look and address. And again, when we do literacy support, it's most effective, you know, at those younger age up until P7. So it's about how we prioritise that. But yes, if the child needs more, that we will continue to do that. But it's a recognition that the resource there we have to use as efficiently, as effectively as possible too.
Okay. Thank you. So David, you indicated there.
Thanks very much, Chair. And I guess just to say, some of what Pat was saying earlier, I always felt that some of the tension, I'm not asking it's awkward officials to come in other departments, but some of the resistance to full integration was probably on the health side of things. But just to say, I think that is something shared across committee, that idea that we want to see more sort of ease of integration across departments and across agencies that are all working in this space. I think that's important. First of all, I'll probably just return to the question that I put to the previous witnesses, and that was around some of the estate and the talk of the pressures on the estate, and particularly the use of areas of schools that are used for other things then being turned into classroom space. And I was thinking particularly of staff rooms, and I've seen that in mainstream schools that are, you know, taking on SEND pupils, but also the pressure obviously in special schools. Is there a cognizance of the effect that will have on staff morale, on team building within the schools, and the sort of maybe not completely unforeseen consequences, but the impact that will have on staff that are really working in a quite intense job as it is, and probably need that space? I'm just thinking, I understand that the priorities the kids in all of this, and that we need to prioritise, and we're in an imperfect situation. We all recognise that, and we all recognise the reasons for that. But I just fear it's becoming very common that we have a loss of sort of staff rooms and communal spaces for staff in schools, and I worry about the impact of that, particularly, as I said in the previous session, I've talked to schools where there is better facilities for staff, and they talk about just how good that is for staff morale, and actually adds to what they're trying to achieve within their schools. Is there cognizance of that within the EA?
Yeah, absolutely. We're very aware of that, and that's the feedback we get on a regular basis. And again, we have plans to expand the special schools. We know the Minister made an announcement for 8 new special schools, but beyond that, we need to give back space to those schools where we have taken up those more communal areas. That requires capital funding, and we're working our way through plans, we're working our way through business cases, we're trying to work up solutions to be able to do that. All of that is going to take time, but it will also be predicated on sufficient capital resource being made available to the EA in order to take those schemes forward. And then I've been in committee here before, and I know you've made the point about, you know, the mainstream schools and the pressures on maintenance. So look, there's a lot to play there, because, you know, there's the balance between investing in the special school estate, but also equally investing in the remainder of the state. So there's a fine balance there. But look, we are acutely aware. We've done a very specific exercise to go in and look at those special schools to try and determine exactly what is it we need to give you back, and then how do we plan for that moving forward, based on the assumption that we will get sufficient capital to do that.
Thank you very much. The only other question I have then is, obviously one of the special school facilities I have within my own constituency is Greenwood Assessment Centre, and they do excellent work there in challenging circumstances. They've had some new facilities, which is promising, but still some very challenging circumstances. I think last time I was speaking to them, and admittedly it was probably a month or two ago, they were unclear necessarily about how they were likely to fit into the future plans and the changes that are being made. I wonder if you could speak to that.
Well, look, I think what we can say is we have engaged with, I don't have that detail with me, but look, we can come back to you on that, but we have engaged with all the special schools around what would the future of the special school estate look like. I think we have to be honest as well that we still have a legacy of how special school provision was provided across the Legacy 5 education and library boards, and some of that practice has just continued. So we're going to have to reach agreement on what that might look like moving forward, and on the basis of that, then that would determine what the model is moving forward for all the specialist provisions. So we have started that with our SEN area planning colleagues, and there was a recent engagement event with the special school principals, and we'll continue to engage with them on that.
Yeah, I understand it may well be that there's been positive engagement around that since then, so I don't want to be overplaying it in that regard, but it was just a case of, I think there was an understanding, things change as you move forward and so on, but just in terms of they feel that they do a very particular role and that some cognizance needs to be given to that, so it was just to feed that in. Thank you, Chair.
Cathy, you'd indicated.
Thanks, Chair. Dale, it'll come to no surprise to you that I want to talk about the literacy support services as well, and to give you your dues, you have engaged with me on this. A lot of what we've talked about today was about providing clarification and instilling confidence. I have correspondence that was sent to me on the 24th of March from the Education Authority that says that pupil support model will still accommodate one-to-one support. However, in the briefing paper that we've got today, and I'll quote it, says, where evidence suggests it will be effective providing a greater proportion of direct support to pupils through small group programmes, this approach will replace support provided on a one-to-one basis. Now, you can understand why there is confusion. You can understand why there are principals, parents, SENCOs out there going, what is right here, what's wrong here. So can we get some clarity on exactly what the process is?
So for absolute clarity, that shouldn't have been in the paper, but no, we and I have been clear, and I've written to you previously as well, Cathy, on this. We're very clear. It's one-to-one support will continue if it's required. However, we want to be smart with our resources, and if we're sending resource in to work with children, can we utilise that resource to work with other children in that school to the benefit of all children?
I think that's welcomed across the board. I don't think there's anybody that would disagree with that, but still that one-to-one support. The point I'm trying to make is you can understand why there's confusion and why there's fear out there of this. If we could get clarity as well, and just to pick up on what the Chair said about the 12-week sessions, which I think are 12-week blocks, which I think are 8 sessions. And I'll give you one case that I have. There's one child has went through it. It has been stated by the literacy support worker that they need another 12-week session, but that the school has to deliver these 2 sessions first. So it's not the case that it will continually roll on. It's not the case that they will get the support straight away after the 12-week session.
As I said, this is interim to get the 1,400 children on the waiting list came to us through the discrepancy model. Okay, so you know what that is. I've explained that in the sense of that you were chosen for literacy service if you had an IQ of above 90. So what we had to do was finish off and try those children that had come through, they had waited. So we provided a block of support of 12 weeks to be able to make sure that we could get through 1,400 children in this time frame. From September, when the local impact teams are up and running, that will continue. They will be able to re-access back in again, because we have to have a start and an end, because there's 2 different systems. So what we're saying is then refer back in again, and the form can be redone again. It's something that's saved, so it's less work. But then we'll be able to put those children through if they need further support from that point.
The reality is that there will still be children out there who now have to wait 24 weeks to get the literacy support that they need.
Yes. But again, trying to, if that's on the system at the RFI, that's come through and they've tried, because at the end of the day, if they have the 12 weeks, those children were finished off with a comprehensive report of what needs to be put in place for this child now. And if that hasn't worked and it comes back through, then those children will be able to then access that support. There was no easy way. I'm being very honest here. It was really difficult because we couldn't open up a new system with 1,400 and more children on a waiting list. So we had to make the decision to put something in place to be able to start up the new system, to be able to move forward from that position.
And will those children then who are in this situation now be prioritised when it comes to the next?
So putting it through on the system, when I put the RFI in, to be able to note like any other, it would sense what have you done in relation to this child, how is this child now progressing, and to be able to notify that child needs more and that they've had reports. And then it's about then whether or not the needs of that child are able to be met then through the local impact teams and be able to provide that support. So Again, there's no way of specifically saying prioritising, but if the school through the RFI put that detail in that they have tried ABC and that this child has been before and there has been no progress, then that will be met through the moderation and then
and look, again, I understand that there's no easy way to do this, but you will understand that there are schools, Senkos, Dale, you spoke with them one-on-one, that have a real fear that all of this is just being pushed back on to them, and they do not have the resource to do that. They are dealing with classrooms of children with severe and complex needs and don't have the time to be doing this one-to-one support. So can you confirm then that the Education Authority pupil support staff are not going to have their direct teaching hours cut, that they will still be out teaching one-on-one 5 days a week or whatever their hours are?
But it's that tiered support. So as I've written to you, in the letter very much, that our model at the minute was very much one-to-one only. But that's not always necessarily the need. And this is the important thing about the local impact teams, is that we're moving away from diagnostic, we're moving away from those elements to bring the child to the table. Yeah. What is the best thing for that child at the moment? And assessing, is it advice and guidance, is it support in the classroom that's needed, is small group work? So it's widening out those options, and definitely one of those options continues to be one-to-one group support, or one-to-one support, as well as group support, as well as then other interventions.
But will those staff still be out?
They'll be out doing a mixture, a mixture of that tiered support, yes.
Their full-time role?
Yes.
Okay.
But can I add that? I think this is also the challenge.
Inquiry,
but this is actually, sorry, Chair, but I suppose it's really important in terms of this is where we all want change and we all want to move, and we've said that the current model isn't delivering for all of the children. And so the evidence base has been used to develop the new model. Some of the challenge has been, I'm being very honest with our staff groups, some of our staff have struggled with the concept of moving to a new set of arrangements. And some of your questions are interesting.
I get that, but there's also parents that are sitting out there who see this, that their child is not going to get the support that they have received previously.
But equally, globally, if I lift myself up, we had huge swathes of children that if they did not meet an IQ, an arbitrary number, they didn't get any support. And we could have had pockets of children that had endless support that perhaps didn't have actually any effective outcomes. So what we're trying to do is say it's the equity of getting in, seeking support, but we need to manage the resource around that, and we are building our management systems to be able to develop and create and record that there are positive outcomes, because we talked about the outcome framework. What we really want to know is that the interventions are making a difference. It could possibly be that we have examples of where children have had years upon years of support. That doesn't necessarily mean that they've made progress. So I get that perhaps there will be some individual families, and this is quite concerning, but we're trying to put in place a new system which hopefully provides equity of provision to all of our children, a greater number.
Have to close it at that stage then. So don't have any other indications at that stage, so that closes the evidence session. So look, there's an awful lot there, and look, I think we certainly reflected on this from the evidence with the department, that I think we do need to probably start revisiting all of these aspects of SEND transformation and SEND services in bite-sized chunks, so we can really get into the detail, because you could pick any one of the topics we've looked at there and get into really meaningful detail on it. So, but potentially we have a fairly tight timeline on the school uniforms bill process that we're going through, but I would hope after the summer we would be picking that up and be able to engage in more detail on a lot of those.
We'd be very
aspects.
Happy to engage, Chair, because we want to be able to get into some granular detail with you to provide the confidence around this, that we believe what we're doing is going to be really effective and it's really important.
Thank you all for your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So just while the witnesses are making their way out, look, there's a huge amount, I think, to work through from both those briefings in terms of any follow-ups, and I do just want to emphasise, so that we don't maybe need to revisit it at forward work planning, I do think after the summer there is a real need to get into this at a much more detailed level, because I think while the overview briefings are good, it feels that we can pursue an avenue so far, and then we move on to the next bit, and we maybe don't get to the detailed scrutiny that we would like to. I'm going to suggest just a couple of things from the briefings, and then open it up for the clerk to speak to, and other members of anything else. I think really because it sits more with DE, I think from Peter's questions around the capital delivery of special schools, I think it would be good to seek an update from the department on that. There was an announcement around investment in new special schools. It would be good to get an idea of exactly where that is at, where they will be built and when they will be built. I think would be worth looking at. They also referenced an exercise that the EA carried out last year on optimal pupil numbers exercise, and I think it would be good to just get an update from them on where that sits in terms of how just the level of oversubscription that there is in our special schools currently. Other than that, I'm happy for the clerk to speak to any other actions that were agreed and any other members from their own lines of inquiry that they wanted to pick up for follow-up.
Yeah, Chair, the witnesses mentioned a DE medicine in schools piece of guidance, which has been awaited for some time, so the committee might want to ask for an update on that. I think the point of asking EEA to advocate on behalf of special schools to support the call for nurses and for additional staff in learning support assistants as well, to meet medical needs in a group setting is important to underline. The witnesses said that appropriate placements for that to be achieved would need restructuring of arrangements. Are members happy that they've dealt with that adequately just now?
Could we just maybe get clarity, because Dale did say it's something they could look at as saying first approach, but he did mention replacements, they have a legislative responsibility, so I'm just wondering, does that need ministerial approvement then to move to that sort of approach, or does it need to go through an assembly or something? Just that a technical clarity on the operational side of that.
How would the outcomes of the delivery plan be monitored and evaluated was a concern as well, which I think Michelle dealt with.
I think an update on the timescale for that, because my recollection from our Bangor Academy meeting was spring, and it's just again how long that. But when do we become into the summer period? So
the witnesses asked the committee to get involved in the outcome of the PHA review of medical support in special schools. So we'll find out where that is and how that intervention might be made. Is there anything else that anyone has?
It's just a separate. It's not a separate issue. It's within it all, but it's a concern that's been raised, and it's around within the specialist provisions now. The kind of pathways for these children who have been placed now. I've had a principal who's raised a concern about how he's now got a cohort of children that are like junior level, and where do these children, when the next cohort are coming in, where do these children go? We're going to be in a scenario where there's just a blockage there. So it's to see what the EA's strategy is around that, or how they're planning for that now, because that's something that's going to, all these SPIMs have been set up, but that's something that's going to come at us very quickly within the next couple of years.
And I think at our concurrent meeting with Economy, because I know we certainly don't want to see young people leaving education or training at 16, but I know there's that parental concern. If the young person is maybe not in a place to take on A-level study, where do they go? Yeah. So with the special educational needs at 16, so I think that is well worth following up. So Peter, I think Peter, you were in first, and then I'll bring Danny in.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. Just maybe something, there's general chat regarding the resourcing of the local impact teams, maybe just some information around that. The witnesses sort of suggested there may be a business case to make sure they're properly resourced. I don't know if we could find out between the department and EA where that is, because I think these impact teams are going to be pretty crucial, and it would be quite important for them to be properly resourced. That would be my only thing.
Yeah, no, I would be in complete agreement, Peter, and I think that point around confidence, because they are so critical. If we don't get it right in September, it can have a very damaging effect. So I think that is important. Dana, you'd wanted to come in?
Yeah, it's just sure you touched on it as well. I was just going back to the code of practice. They we are hearing concerns. They're saying there's not. They're asking us to be full of confidence. I'm really not. I don't know what way we'll word it, but it's just to get that, because you said about the scrutiny side of it, it feels like it needs to be scrutinised by the committee at the very least, if not on the floor of the assembly.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that is I know the Children's Law Centre raised that in our informal briefing. They highlighted that the graduated response framework and their assessment really reads like the 2016 revised code of practice, which has never been enacted, and there is a slight concern there around what is maybe happening with that. So I don't want to suggest there's anything nefarious going on, but I think it's just at the very least, is it going to create grey areas around even where legal rights sit when we get to SENDIST. So I think maybe seeking clarity from that, perhaps from the department, as that's the legislative aspect really sits with them on that.
I remember he's a wee bit hazy from the informal,
yeah.
But it was my sort of understanding that there was concerns raised in the consultation, but we're not seeing it.
Yeah.
That's what I couldn't really understand why they said there was no concerns.
Yep. And look, I'm hearing locally from Senco's that the graduated response training, that there has been concerns around that. I don't know how we draw that out, but again, we're keen to hear from Senco. So again, if there's any Sencos tuning in who are prepared to come and give evidence, we'd love to hear from you. Okay, is there anything else from any other members? No, and there's a lot there. And look, as I say, I really do hope after summer we'll get into this and maybe some more manageable chunks to get into the detail of it. Okay, so that brings us to the end of that item. Item 8 was to be a briefing from the Examiner of Statutory Rules on the School Uniforms Guidelines and Allowances Bill, but that has been put off until next week's session. So that takes us then to item 9. I'm going to just suggest maybe a quick comfort break. The room's really, really warm. I think probably everybody could do with just moving for a couple of minutes. So, but we'll make just a quick 5-minute comfort break, and we'll come back for the next item if we could just turn off the live.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 sound. Committee Room 29.
Yes, please. Okay, members. So that's us back into public session, and we're at item 9 in the agenda, which is an oral briefing by the Assembly Research Service RAISE on the school uniforms, guidelines and allowances bill, and the paper that's being presented is at page 97 of your packs. So obviously let you get settled. And with us today we have Gillian Kane, Research Officer with RAISE, and Nathan Mulholland, also Research Officer from RAISE. So I'll hand over to yourselves. That the paper is very comprehensive. So I will hand over to you to sort of make an initial presentation in relation to that. Ask for up to 10 minutes, and then we'll move into question and answer from there. Thank you for your time this afternoon.
Thanks very much, Chair. Well, first of all, I'm going to just give a bit of a background to the bill, talk about the existing guidance, the consultation, and then get into the contents of the bill, and very briefly touch on what's happening in England, Scotland, Wales and the Republic of Ireland. And then I'm going to hand over to Nathan to talk through the financial implications, and then I'll just highlight at the end some of the areas for consideration that the committee want to look at in a bit more detail. So I think to start off with, it's probably worthwhile emphasising that in all the documentation and all the consultations that the department have undertaken, they've emphasised the fact that there is widespread support for school uniforms themselves for a number of reasons, that just creating a community ethos, pride, safeguarding and reducing any social stigma. But there has been, as the committee knows, long-standing concerns about the cost of school uniforms and parents. And there was research that was undertaken by the Irish Legal Credit Unions in 2022 that showed the back-to-school costs were a concern and a burden on 78% of parents. So in terms of the existing guidance, it was brought in 2011 and was refreshed in 2018. And it's obviously at the moment non-statutory. It's advisory for schools, and there's sort of three main principles to it. It states that school uniform policy should be fair and reasonable in practical and financial terms. It should have regard to school's duties under the relevant equality legislation. School uniform should be comfortable, practical and represent value for money. So that's the advice as it stands at the moment. And it also contains sort of further advice on things like the costs, non-compliance, if pupils aren't complying with the policy, and issues around travelling to school. So that's things like road safety and having reflective materials on school uniforms. And it also points, the guidance at the moment points to the existing equality legislation, the relevant equality legislation in the appendix. So then the consultation on this particular bill was held between June and September last year. And there was two main points to it, and that was making school uniform costs more affordable, including via cap on uniform costs, and also placing the existing DE guidance on school uniform on a statutory footing. And the consultation was based on 6 main principles. The first 3 were affordability, comfort and sustainability of school uniforms. So the sustainability was relating to things like school uniform banks. And then the last 3 were about the policy itself. So it should be publicly published, it should be reviewed regularly, and it should be developed in consultation with children and their parents and carers. So in the end, there was about 7,500 responses that were received from the consultation, and 4,000 of those were from children and young people. And there was very strong support for the proposals in the consultation. So 77% supported the guidance being made statutory. Nearly all, it was 97% agreed with those 6 principles I've just outlined. 86% agreed that branded sports kit should not be compulsory, and 88% supported cost control measures such as a cap. So those are strong levels of agreement for the principles in the consultation. So turning now to the contents of the bill. The bill places a legal requirement on the department to publish new legally binding guidelines on school uniform policies. And it also extends the eligibility of the school clothing allowance to independent schools. And in terms of the structure, Part 1 directs the contents of the new guidelines, and that's clauses 1 to 13. Part 2, clause 14, extends the clothing allowance to independent school students. And Part 3 provides the time the bill comes into operation and the name of the bill if enacted. So clause 1 directs the department to publish guidelines for the school uniform policies, and states that they're to be reviewed from time to time, but it doesn't state a time frame for that. And it says that the guidelines set by DE may include, but are not limited to, general or specific factors schools should consider, the rationale for the factors, who needs to be consulted, how often the policy should be reviewed, guidelines on transition arrangements, and it's very explicit that it states that no subsequent language in the bill limits what DE may put into the guidelines. And while there's more detail in clauses 2 to 5, this doesn't limit what's said in clause 1. So it's quite a broad remit, and it's not necessarily exclusive, the things that are in clauses 2 to 5 then. So clause 2 gives a bit more about the principles that the proposed bill is based on. So it states that there shouldn't be unfair costs, and that's defined later on in the bill. It states the comfort and practicality of the uniform for pupils. It says that it talks about the affordability of the uniform and ensuring that the clothing is good value for money, and the accessibility of uniform, which, as I said, is about the school uniform clothing banks and whether they should be available in schools. It also says that it may address what is reasonable for schools to require from a specific supplier or manufacturer, and whether it's reasonable to require certain styles of clothing, and whether it is reasonable for schools to require branded clothing for specific activities or occasions, such as PE. It should be noted, though, that in the consultation there were a number of other principles that were put forward, things around religious observance, the needs of pupils with disabilities and gender, and some of the respondents also mentioned whether there should be something specific about inclusion and inclusivity as that part. So then clause 3 and 4 are subject to a commencement orders, and they relate to the cap. So clause 3 puts or suggests a potential cap on the number of branded items, and then clause 4 is the financial aspects of that. And I think obviously when the department were up with the committee, there was a lot of discussion about the pros and cons of having a cap and how that would work in practice, and the department, to my understanding, are consulting on that as we speak. So clause 5 then looks at the types of school and pupils that will be covered by the guidelines, and allows the department to vary this by school, the school type, age group, and also by the time of the school year. And clause 6 then puts a duty on schools to adhere to the guidelines at all stages in the sort of design, implementation, and monitoring, and the enforcement of the guidelines, and puts that duty on then the school manager to publish the guidelines. Clause 7 then directs the school to, or gives the department the ability to direct the school to revise the guidelines if it doesn't adhere to the school guidelines policy, and if all the normal complaints processes have been exhausted. Then clause 8 talks about the meaning of unfair costs, and that's what describes how the department will deem what is excessive cost. So that's things like the role of branded clothing, the styles, and also the burden that it puts or could potentially put on lower income households. Clause 9 then defines what clothing and styles mean, whether that's footwear, colours, fabrics or badges or emblems. And then from sort of 10, clause 10 defines the schools and pupils and school managers in terms of the Education and Libraries Order 1986. Clause 12 then says that it won't be at this stage applicable to pupils that are below compulsory school age, but clause 13 then allows or gives the department the room to revise that via a resolution to be put in front of the Assembly. Part 2 then, school clothing allowances, talk about this is the section that puts extends the school clothing allowances to independent schools. And then finally, clause 15 is the commencement. So that's a very quick overview of the bill, and I'm very conscious that I've rushed through that in the interest of time. And in the paper you'll also see, I think it's from page 128 in your pack, that we have pulled together a table that sort of compares some of the differences across the different jurisdictions. So for example, the guidelines are statutory in England and Wales, but not in Scotland and the Republic of Ireland. And they've got different underpinning principles in terms of keeping costs down and inclusion. And there's different approaches to branded items in the guidelines. For example, there's a bill going through Westminster at the moment that proposes to cap the number of branded items at 3. In Wales, branded items are not compulsory at all. Scotland, there's advice against branded items, and in the Republic of Ireland, it's only sew-on or iron-on crests and emblems that can be used on school uniforms. So before I get into the issues for further consideration, I'm going to pass over to Nathan for the finance.
Thank you, Gillian, and thank you, committee, for having us here today. Chair, I will try to keep this as brief. So section 6 of the paper is a review of the potential costs of it. The explanatory and financial memorandum, the FM, that accompanied the bill identified financial effects of the bill's proposals, notably paragraph 31, which states it is anticipated it may cost around an additional £2,000 per annum to provide pupils attend independent schools with access to clothing allowance, and then concludes there should not be further additional expense incurred. So, as noted in the paper, there are currently 13 independent schools in Northern Ireland, and a list can be found in the appendix of the paper. I think it's page 144 of your pack. As noted, this figure will vary year on year depending on a number of factors in regards to eligibility of pupils and who's attending those schools to receive the school clothing allowance. So, as I said previously, the AFM says there should not be any further expense incurred. However, the bill paper we prepared has considered how the provision of the bill could incur implementation-related costs in other areas. So, the paper reflects that to produce the guidelines, there will be a resource cost within the department, and as noted in that section of the bill, this could become a more regular thing. So, over the last number of years, there have been guidance issued by the department. There's been 2 over the last nearly 15 years, but if the provisions of the bill require that to become a more regular thing, it become a standing item within the department, and that may require additional resource within the department in terms of staff and that workload. The bill also provides for the potential implementation of the cost cap, and the paper considers the potential financial implications that could arise from this, including any concern. Departmental officials, in responding to questions from this committee, noted there were risks to the approaches being considered, and their aim of the department was to avoid unintended consequences. However, if this is not achieved, the paper considers that this could be legally challenged, and that subsequently there would be financial implications for the department and/or the EA due to the resources that would be required to contest or more generally address those concerns. And finally, this section of the paper considers the area of enforcement, that if schools fail to comply with the guidelines or future cost cap. The paper considers potential implications for the department in terms of, again, increased workload for officials to investigate and address the issues of enforcement. And again, they have talked about it within how they would monitor that. There was suggestions of creating an independent board. I know that was raised by some members, but the Minister had indicated that there wasn't financial resource to do that. So it would suggest that then that burden of enforcement will be put on the department, and if there is a lot of issues of enforcement, of course that is again required additional resource to address that. I'll hand it back to Gillian to conclude with some potential other areas for further consideration.
Well, we've listed out in the paper quite a few areas for further consideration, so I think in the interest of time I won't go through all of those, but some of them do actually relate to guidelines further on down the line, because as the committee is aware that this is only enabling the guidelines to be put in a statutory footing with some detail, but we don't actually have the guidelines themselves to refer to. So some of the things that we've suggested in the paper is that the committee may wish to consider is whether there is sufficient detail from the department in what the content of the guidelines will look like, whether the principles that have been outlined underpinning the bill, and especially in clause 2, whether they are the right ones, or whether the committee may wish to suggest additions to those. And as I said, some of these questions might be for consideration once the guidelines are actually placed in front of the committee. So in terms of some of the general considerations that we have, we thought it might be worth exploring the timeline for the production of the guidelines and how long the committee will have to consider and comment on those once they're developed, and also the outworkings of the consultation on the potential price cap and the implications of the mechanism of a commencement order for those clauses 3 and 4. Again, this is linked to what Nathan's just said, getting more clarity in how the department calculated the cost of £2,000 for the implementation of the bill. We're presuming that that's for the rollout of the school clothing allowance to the independent schools, but it would be good to see how that worked out. And also, should the guidance and grant be extended to nursery schools? And finally, just in the general bit, has the committee received sufficient detail from the department on the likely financial implications of the bill? Again, that goes back to that £2,000 reflect the likely reality. There's also some sort of more equality and inclusion questions. In the equality screening accompanying the consultation, there was quite a bit of emphasis on the uniform flexibility. As I mentioned, the needs of people with disability maybe were for religious observance, and whether that is covered sufficiently by the bill. Again, it came out in the consultation, and I think in evidence that the committee has heard about sort of gender issues relating to uniforms, whether girls should be able to wear trousers to school as a matter of course, and whether that should be addressed specifically here. And finally, on the quality thing, there's been evidence about the different cost of school uniforms for girls and boys, and in the equality screening it did say that the guidelines would be likely to address this, so I think there's a question around, is there a need for more clarity there? And again, you'll see from the paper that there's more about sort of the implications in schools, parents, suppliers, manufacturers, and also the implementation and enforcement implications. But again, that's sort of mixing up a wee bit the bill and the future guidelines. But I'll stop there in the interest of time.
That's great. Thank you. And I mean, I'll raise a couple of points. I mean, again, the paper was very comprehensive, and it may simply be today for members to decide if we want to take your areas for further consideration directly to the department now to maybe seek some clarity. That may be a sensible outworking. But one of the things that is clear when you look at the bill is that really the bill is creating powers to give statutory effect to some guidance, and it's not necessarily clear exactly what will be in that guidance. From your experience of dealing with these matters, is that fairly standard legislative practice, or would it be? Would you expect to see more detail in the bill so that you would have a degree of certainty around what this guidance might look like when it arrives?
Probably not something I've come across before, but that could be just a function of what I've come across. Or that might be more for the legal team. Okay. Is it something?
No, I say from a perspective that my focus is very much on the finance, so it's not something I've really covered in the past, so it wouldn't be our focus area when we're looking at.
No, that's fine. I think just some of the concerns are that there's maybe a sense of needing to take a lot on trust that the guidance that comes out of this, the outworking, will deliver on the bill's intention to bring costs down. Now, that's notwithstanding whether we think the bill should do more than just address costs, but that's another consideration. But I suppose I would sort of just want to put on record there is definitely, I think, some anxiety, and even from anyone who's commented on the bill, not on this committee, I am hearing some concerns that just there's a lot of trust involved. But I appreciate you possibly can't comment on that. I was going to raise some of the issues around gender and inclusivity, around whether that could maybe be on the face of the bill rather than just being assured that the guidelines will cover it, and again, that's something the committee will no doubt take away. When you were looking at further issues to potentially follow up on the bill, did you consider at all whether it would have been appropriate for there to be any sort of process put in place once the guidelines are produced, for those to be subject to any further scrutiny, or indeed to require the committee draft affirmative resolution, that some sort of mechanism like that to ensure that those guidelines were subject to further scrutiny, given that we don't know what they're going to look like? Is that something that you considered when looking at the paper?
It is one of the areas that we raised for further consideration, Chair, because again, it was also difficult for us actually doing the paper when there was very little detail in the bill. So there are in the paper a range of issues that are outside the bill as it stands, for that very reason. And I think maybe getting clarity on the timeline for the production of the guidelines would be useful.
No, that's all really helpful, and thank you for it. It's a really comprehensive paper and a really good starting point for our scrutiny. I'll just open up to other members. Is anyone else wanting to come in with any other questions at this stage? Is there anything else? No. So I think that is great. You've had an easy run today. I think the question will be really if we're content to take those. Oh, sorry, Peter is looking to come in. Sorry, apologies.
Apologies, Chair. I'll have to work out how to lower this hand now. It's gone. I think, Chair, you keep me right on this, but at the APG yesterday, I think officials said that the guidance was it going to minister May, June? Is that the same stuff we're talking about?
Yeah,
You're nodding your head.
June was suggested. So just for clarity for anyone observing, the officials working on the bill presented to the all-party group on parental participation in education yesterday, and they did suggest, that is my recollection, that it would be before the minister. The guidance would be before the minister in June, but I'm not sure how that then pans out in terms of when it would be made available elsewhere. So there's maybe a bit of clarity needed, but yeah, no, that is absolutely right, Peter.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
No, that's fine. Well, look, thank you for that, and we'll very much we'll have a discussion from there. Thank you very much. Okay, members. So, I think a lot of the issues that are being highlighted from the research paper for further consideration, I think, are many of the things that came out in the initial questioning of officials when they presented the bill to committee. I'm certainly happy to suggest that we do take all of those issues for further consideration, and at this stage we can obviously factor them into any further work on the bill. But I think it would be appropriate at this stage to seek all those clarifications from the department at this early stage. Are we all in agreement on that?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll take that forward. Okay, so that then moves us on to, we had a very brief attempt to deal with item 10 earlier in the agenda. We didn't get too far. So we'll go back to item 10, and that's pages 148 to 265 of your packs, and then also some additional correspondence in your table papers. There's a summary note at page 148, and as usual, I will suggest any items that require a committee decision or discussion. Otherwise, they'll be dealt with as per the summary note, unless members want to raise any of the other items. So item 10.2 on page 150, it's a response from the Department of Education on training to provide support for children with visual impairment. Are committee content that we note that, and at this stage share it with Angel Eyes NI, who raised it initially, and if they wish to come back to us they can. Are we agreed? Item 10.3 on page 152 is a letter from the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission setting out its views on the work of the Restraint and Seclusion Task and Finish Group. It's another helpful response on this issue. I would want to suggest that we note and then potentially just review that in the round following our briefing with NIPSO on this issue. Are we agreed? Mm-hmm. Item 10.5 on page 163 is correspondence from the Committee for the Economy asking the committee to consider a joint evidence session from the Assembly Education Service and Speakers for Schools. I propose we note, I think that's something the Economy Committee are taking forward. I know that Speakers for Schools and the Education Service are potentially running a virtual sort of event where young people will get the opportunity to engage with sort of what roles and opportunities are available at the Assembly. So if they want to come back to us on that, they can. Are we agreed? Right. Item 10.7 on page 166, it's contact from the British Heart Foundation Northern Ireland seeking to provide a demonstration of its classroom Revive Our training. So I think this would be a really positive thing for the committee to get involved with, and my understanding is that they're happy to come prior to a committee session and run that demonstration and make themselves available for a bit of time on that. I think that's something that would be really positive for the committee to engage with. If members are agreed, we can take that invite forward. Agreed. Item 10.10 on page 245. It's an invitation from the Open University to attend the launch of their report Learnings from Why Riot, and it's addressing the whys behind youth violence, and I'm going to suggest we note for diaries. We agreed? Item 10.11 on page 247 is a response from the Minister of Finance providing an update on the digital transformation proposals that pertain to education. I'll open it up for members' views. I mean, I would suggest we probably do want to just note at this stage, but it does feel on these digital transformation projects that progress is quite slow, and it would be good to maybe see that moving a bit more quickly, but it seems there's a wider digital review that is now being associated with this. But I mean, I'll propose we note unless members have any other particular views at this stage. Agreed to note. Item 10.12 on page 250, it's an invitation from the INEQE Safeguarding Group to visit its offices and see its work. Look, I think a lot of this stuff around online safety and keeping children and young people safe is very topical at the moment, but I'm not sure coordinating diaries in terms of current pressures around other business would be feasible, but I'm happy to open that up for discussion. We can leave it for individual members to take up the option of a visit, or we could indeed invite the group to come and brief committee directly after recess. I think it's a subject area we've shown interest in, so I mean, I would be happy to go with that latter option, but if there is keen interest in a visit to their facility, also happy. So I'm just happy to open that up to members if there's any particular views. Happy to pick up either a visit or a briefing after recess.
Objection to the visit just in
It'll be, I think, after recess, very much so, and I think pretty much everything that's coming through now will be after recess, just in terms of other work already on the agenda. Okay. Item 10.13 on page 252. I think it's noted in Pax's correspondence from Angel Eyes NI with its views on the uniform bill. I think on looking at the correspondence, it is actually they've copied us into their response to the free school meals uniform grant consultations. I think on that basis I would propose we note. Members are agreed. Item 10.14, page 257, is correspondence from the Department of Education providing additional information following a briefing on the capital programme on the 5th of March. The range of different individual issues that members raised, I'm going to suggest that we note, and if members want to pick any of those up directly, that they can do. Are we agreed? Agreed. Item 10.15 on page 263. It's a response from the Department of Education regarding specific concerns about access NI checks in a school in Northern Ireland. Now, I'll take this in open session at this stage, but if we do get into a scenario where we're discussing an individual school or anyone could potentially be identified, I will move it into closed session with members' agreement. There was a particular individual who raised some queries in relation to this, so I would want to suggest at this stage we share the response with that individual and give them the opportunity to respond to committee, and then we can discuss any further follow-up based on that. Are members agreed? Mm-hmm. Agreed. Item 10.16 on page 265 is a response from the Minister of Education regarding the end of the Skulls Braga scheme, which is an issue we've discussed a number of times here at committee. I would want to propose at this stage that we note, but pending the outcome of the meeting with the Minister that is detailed in that correspondence. Now, I don't take a huge degree of comfort from the letter that there's going to be any funding forthcoming, but I think the agreement to meet is positive, and there may be scope to discuss whether there's maybe a bit of cross-departmental work could be looked at there to maybe assist that scheme. So are members comfortable with that, potentially with just reaching out to Skulls Braga and advising them that if they want to come back with any direct feedback following the meeting, that we'd be open to receive that, if we're agreed? Item 10.17, this is now material in your tabled papers. It's an invite from the Minister to the Transform Ed NI conference on the 8th of May. So again, I would suggest members note that for their diaries. We're agreed. Item 10.18 is again copy, and this is all just being referenced because it wasn't in the original summary note, so hopefully we can get through it quickly. It's a copy of the ministerial statement presented this week on the North-South Ministerial Council meeting. I would again propose we note. Members are agreed. And then item 10.19 in your tabled papers is correspondence from the Northern Ireland Commissioner for Children and Young People regarding the school uniform bill, and it's said they've particularly highlighted, just following on from our last conversation, around some of the gender-related issues concerning uniform, and specifically the permission being provided for girls to wear trousers, and that they have asked if the two young people in particular who are running a campaign on this could brief committee. So I'll take a steer from the clerk. I would certainly be very happy to facilitate that. I don't know if they can be facilitated along with the youth event that we're planning to run for consultation, or with the Nicky Youth Panel more widely, but I mean, I'm certainly happy to facilitate it whatever way is most practical.
We'll want to get them just on Hansard, and it'll probably be more in this format than the less formal stakeholder events we've had before, but certainly I'll get in touch with them about their diaries.
Are members agreed to extend that invite to those young people?
Agreed.
Agreed. Okay, that is fine. So then, other than that, are members content to dispose of the correspondence as per the summary note at page 148?
Agreed.
So that brings us to item 11, and that's the forward work programme. So members will find that at page 267 of their packs, and I will hand over to the clerk to speak to that at this stage.
Members, you have a couple of days that are programmed already, and that have been in the pipeline for quite some time. So I wanted to take your temperature about those. One of them is on school governance and restraint and seclusion, kind of broadly, so you would have it. So the Audit Office and Children's Law Centre pulling together some strands of those issues. And the other is, so that's the 7th. Then the 14th is we've got our joint meeting with the Economy Committee, and in the afternoon the Corleona Gael Sculliocta, and an update on Irish medium and integrated schools from the department. So I mean, the time pressure is on to do as much school uniform work as possible. I've ascertained from you already that everybody has some time during the week for an additional meeting for the legislation. So I would propose that we do that at least either the Tuesday afternoon or Wednesday morning seems to be particularly good time for those. And then recess, I haven't had enough replies yet as to recess availability to ensure that we would actually have both a decision making and an evidence taking quorum for those meetings. So that's again why I'm kind of looking at the front loading of that process. Is everybody content to still do those 2 days as they were planned? Or do you...
If I could just speak,
Yes.
I think those two particular, I'll bring it in a moment, Deputy Chairman. I think those two evidence sessions, I think that they've been in the programme for quite some time. I'd be reluctant to drop those at this stage. I think it wouldn't be in very good faith to those organisations. I know particularly NIPSO already actually had been moved on from a previously agreed session, and restraint and seclusion is something we've looked at in quite a lot of detail recently, so I think it would be good to finish that off. And I know there has been interest around the Irish medium and a number of issues that we wanted to follow up, so I would want to suggest we do retain those, but I certainly don't think we have scope really to add very much more to the programme beyond the bill. Now there are a couple of issues you may want to pick up. I know the department are very keen to brief on the Transform Ed NI initiative, and also the consultation that's out on the legislation on mandating education or training up until age 18, which again is something we will want to hear about, but it's whether or not we actually do have the capacity in the forward work plan. But certainly those two items I would want to suggest we retain them, Deputy Chair.
I have no difficulty with that. I was just going to mention the issue of the informal meetings on Tuesday. Is that time not going to be used?
Yeah, so that time would be used so that you would get one evidence session fitted in that kind of 45 minutes to an hour, and then the 5 to 7 kind of tea time on Tuesday is a time that people have usually been able to attend. So I've got like more than 5 members essentially saying that would suit them. And
that would be for the likes of youth engagement, those sort of events,
so
where
maybe
you're bringing
you might
a number
have,
of
yeah,
groups
you might
together.
have like 2 or 3 parent groups all present one after one another, or 3, like say Nikki panel and the youth assembly, or so you could get kind of themed replies.
And just in terms of procedures, we don't need to take them in open session like we do at committee, or we do need. They would be
an open session, and Hansard would cover it because it's
okay.
legislative, and
so
we would need a quorum for it because it's legislative.
And would have to be done in one of the committee rooms, or not?
I think
probably
for Hansard really, that's
okay.
Yeah,
well,
so it's easier to get a committee room on a Tuesday than it is on a Wednesday, because obviously accommodation for the other committees will be a premium.
That's fine.
But I mean, the chair proposed we don't have an informal meeting arranged for next Tuesday morning yet, so the chair did consider that maybe the committee could look at a forward work plan for the bill.
If that would be helpful for members to actually to really maybe nail down who we want to be hearing from. And
I mean, I just haven't heard back from all of you about recess, and we want to, if there is a danger that the process is going to slip into recess, obviously arrangements need to be made to support that.
Good chair would ensure that doesn't happen.
Sorry?
A good chair would ensure that doesn't happen.
The current chair, whether he's good or not, would be anticipating facilitating that, but we'll see how the sessions go. But if members feel that at the Tuesday morning session and the next week would be helpful to maybe just have a focused look at how we want to map out the uniforms evidence session, then I think that makes sense. But rather than maybe clogging up committee time with that sort of procedural discussion. So if we're all happy with that,
okay. And then for Transform Ed and the extension of the school leaving age, maybe we could get like a detailed written briefing in the first instance and see how we go timing wise. Yeah,
there may be some things that just have to be forecast after recess, regrettably. Other than that, that's if members are agreed. Okay, that's fine. So we'll just to confirm, we've got committee agreement that we endorse the forward work programme currently as drafted. Great. Item 12 is any other business. Is there any?
I just wanted to put on record, I had 2 meetings this week that I thought I would share. I had one with a student who's conducting a master's on the lack of education in Northern Ireland on the UN rights of the child, and how, in our schools we think that there's a gap there, and should we be doing more to educate our young people on the rights that they're entitled to. I don't know if that's something we could look at further down the line after recess. And then I just came from the International Development All-Party Group, and we had a briefing on global citizenship education from Trocra and Concern Worldwide, and they had said it's a really good opportunity to educate our young people on things like human rights, peace building, and wider global issues. I'm just wondering, I've asked the RAISE department to identify, what schools get this education, what schools don't. It's very a piecemeal approach, and I'm just mindful we live in a tumultuous political times. It might be beneficial for young people, and I don't know if that's something we could beg in after recess, but it's just, we're talking about curriculum changes, and perhaps now's the time to look at this.
Certainly happy if Clark has a note of that again. We can add that to the potential items for forward work planning.
I have tried to ascertain the time frame for the curriculum review exercise that's going on, so I'll ask again about that, and it's maybe something that the committee could feed into. Thank you.
Okay. No other indications there for item 12, so that takes us to item 13, and that's the date, time and place of next meeting, which is scheduled for Wednesday the 7th of May, and that's at 2 p.m. at room 29 Parliament Buildings, and leaves me to put the question that the committee meeting does now adjourn. Are we agreed? Agreed. Okay.
Committee room 29. Sound. Committee room 29. Sound. Committee room 29. Sound. Committee room 29. Sound. Committee room 29. Sound.